Okay. I call the 2,374th meeting of the Milwaukee City Council to order. This meeting is being held in person at City Hall and by video conference. The public may participate in this meeting by coming to City Hall or joining the Zoom webinar. The meeting is being broadcast live on the city's YouTube channel and Comcast cable channel 30 in city limits. There will be opportunities for the public to speak during this meeting. If you would like to address council, you may come to City Hall. However, seating in chambers is limited. If you are interested in speaking, please let staff know by filling out a yellow comment card for those at City Hall or emailing ocr@milwaukeeoregon.gov for those on Zoom. When it is time to take public comment, staff will monitor the comment cards, email inbox, and Zoom participant list and chat. We'll take comments in the order they are received and seen. Written comments may be emailed to ocr@milwaukeeoregon.gov. Spanish translation services are available upon request. The public is asked to request translation and other meeting accessibility services at least 48 hours before the meeting. Contamos con servicio de traducción al español cuando sea solicitado. Se pide al público que solicite servicios de traducción y otros servicios de accesibilidad para reuniones por lo menos 48 horas antes de la reunión. Translation services are also available in other languages. Okay, please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, announcements. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Native land. The City of Milwaukee respectfully acknowledges that our community is located on the ancestral homeland of the Clackamas people. In 1855, the surviving members of the Clackamas signed the Willamette Valley Treaty, also known as the Kalapuya, etc. Treaty, with the federal government in good faith. We offer our respect and gratitude to the indigenous people of this land. Okay, on to announcements. The city's annual boards and committees recruitment is now open. These official volunteer groups cover a variety of areas and work directly on local projects. Applications will be accepted until April 1st. Do you know someone who volunteers regularly and went above and beyond in 2022? If so, please nominate them for the Volunteer of the Year award. Nominees can include anyone who resides in Milwaukee or is a member of a nonprofit organization or business that serves the Milwaukee community. Nominations are accepted through an online form on Engage Milwaukee through Wednesday, February 15th, and that link is up there on the slide. Join the Milwaukee Parks Foundation for the next second Saturday work party at Minthorn Springs this Saturday, February 11th from 9:30 a.m. to noon. Volunteers will work to remove invasive plants and pick up trash. And it looks like it might even be clear on Saturday, so come out and join us. City Manager Ann Ober will hold the next open door session on Friday, February 24th from 9 to 10 a.m. here in City Hall Council Chambers. No sign up is necessary. Stop by to ask questions, raise concerns, or just find out more about what the city is doing. For information about each of these events and others, please visit the city's homepage at milwaukeeoregon.gov or call 503-786-7555. And anybody have announcements that weren't on there, such as Winter Light Festival things they might want to talk about?
You're looking at me. The Winter Light Festival is ongoing. This last weekend was the first weekend that kicked it off. Most of the anchor sites will be open next weekend, but there are a lot of pop-up sites throughout Portland and Clackamas County. I was excited to see multiple sites in Clackamas County, but we still need some sites in Milwaukie. So we have one of those locations, the Goat Garden of Lights, and you're all welcome to come and check it out. There are lights and there are actual goats. So that's Friday and Saturday, 6 to roughly 10 p.m.
Okay, great. Okay, nothing else. We'll move on to celebrating Black Excellence Month, and the council president will take the lead on this.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I want to highlight my shirt here that says, Black history is everybody's history. And I'm going to read a little statement about that, and then I'll talk about Black excellence. Black history is everybody's history because the story of African Americans is inextricably intertwined with the broader story of American history and the development of the United States. The experiences, contributions, and struggles of African Americans have shaped and influenced the country in countless ways. From the fight against slavery and segregation to the civil rights movement and the ongoing efforts to achieve racial justice, African American history is a vital part of the American narrative. Understanding this history is a vital part of the American narrative. Understanding this history is essential for complete understanding of the United States and its place in the world. Additionally, recognizing and valuing the contributions of African Americans helps to promote cultural awareness, understanding, and inclusiveness for all people. In short, Black history is everybody's history because it is an essential part of the collective American story and a testament to strength, resilience, and diversity of its people. Now, I want to read a little bit about what Black excellence means to me. There are various definitions of what Black excellence means. Some may limit the definition to excelling in certain areas of life, such as the achievement and accomplishments of Black individuals in education, arts, sports, science, technology, and business. It is a celebration of the excellence and success of Black people and highlights the positive contributions they have made to society despite facing systemic barriers and discrimination. The term emphasizes the importance of recognizing and uplifting Black individuals who have excelled and served as inspirations to others in the Black community. While these are examples of Black excellence, I want to share my thoughts on what Black excellence means to me. Black excellence does not mean that Black people must sacrifice their health, mental well-being, and welfare for the sake of greatness. There is always one more mountain to climb. Black excellence is not just the first who accomplished the unimaginable or staring down the face of adversity. Black excellence is not just those who achieve accolades and awards. Even though society may not deem the household where parents are working multiple jobs to provide for their family as Black excellence, they are Black excellence. The Black students that make it through the school system and has had to overcome systemic barriers and achieve personal goals, no matter how big or small they may be, they are Black excellence. The Black man that makes it home safe to see his loved ones, who faces systemic challenges and dangers, such as racial profiling and police brutality that threatens his safety and well-being. He is Black excellence. It is necessary for the Black community that's proud of itself and loves itself to be okay with doing its own very best, rather than the best of the community. Your excellence shouldn't be based on output determined by someone else's expectations or taken for granted because you're the only you in the room. It is made up of whatever it is that's essential to you. And it doesn't go away when you allow yourself to be good enough or even just plain average once in a while. Black excellence can be found in the daily struggles and triumphs of Black people. Black excellence is simply existing in a world that so desperately wants to destroy you. Thank you.
Thank you. And are you going to read the proclamation? You want me to read it? Okay. So there's the proclamation on the board. Whereas in February, we recognize and acknowledge the struggles of Black Americans for racial justice that stirred the very conscience of our nation and are helping to guide the shape of her character. And whereas Black Americans for generations have courageously led the pursuit of justice and equality, from Harriet Tubman to Martin Luther King Jr. and beyond, as our nation struggles to overcome the systemic racism that results in persistent inequality, such leaders are crucial to guide us to the principle that all people are created equal. And whereas Black Americans have made significant contributions to our nation's economic, educational, political, artistic, literary, scientific, and technological advancements, despite historical and current injustices. And whereas in Milwaukie, we celebrate the contributions of Black Americans who have been active in our community, including entrepreneurial boxing promoter George Moore and Milwaukie Pastry Kitchen proprietors Curtis and Dorothy Hadley. And whereas recent incidents have given rise to greater awareness of the continued discrimination and even violence that Black Americans face daily, and the importance of a greater national dialogue to promote understanding and break down barriers. And whereas, as individuals, we must learn more about the history of Black Americans generally, and in Oregon in particular, and work to build a Milwaukie where every person has equitable access to educational and employment opportunities and housing. Now, therefore, I, Lisa Beatty, Mayor of the City of Milwaukie, a municipal corporation in the County of Clackamas in the state of Oregon, and with the full support and sponsorship of the City Council, do hereby proclaim February 2023 to be Celebrating Black Excellence Month in Milwaukie, and recommend its observance and with appropriate programs and activities. Thank you. Okay, and now we have a special report from the Llewellyn neighborhood. The safe routes to people who've been working on safe routes to school, Nick Delonzo, Philip Stos, and I understand Nicole's not coming. Is that why Camden's here?
She called us this morning and said she couldn't make it, so we're
Okay.
gonna have to wing it.
Okay,
We can do the best we can,
Oh,
you know, improvise, substitute, overcome,
That's all right. We got
kind of a thing.
All right.
So,
Good evening.
good evening.
Phil's going to lead us off on this one.
okay. Good evening, Mayor Beatty, city council members, city staff, citizens of Milwaukie. We come here tonight to share with you the work that we've done in the last 2 years with respects to traffic safety, pedestrian safety, bicycle safety. And I want to thank you for this opportunity to let us come and share with you tonight. So I'm going to start with a timeline of how we got here. So we started, actually we didn't start, but around July of 2020 through June of 2021, we spent a lot of time at our neighborhood association meetings talking about speeding, congestion, pass-through traffic, lack of pedestrian, bicycle infrastructure. And at the end of that time, we decided to create a transportation safety committee. And we started doing that, and we immediately started working on asking ourselves, what do we want to know? How are we going to go about this thing? So we decided to come up with this survey. And in this survey, we wanted to start a dialogue with the neighbors in our neighborhood, in Llewellyn neighborhood. And we wanted to start a dialogue to find out what other people were thinking, what they were talking about, what their major concerns were, what streets they were concerned with, what specific specific items that they were talking about. We then identified, we reached out to the churches, we reached out to 34 of the businesses in our neighborhood. We reached out to the schools in this process. And what we finally did, we came up with between August of 21 and September of 21, we rolled out our survey. And we rolled this out in social media. We rolled it out in online survey. We actually even did a Spanish translation, and we did it that way. And we presented it at the Carefree Sunday event and that year. And as a result of this, we got 157 citizen response to our survey. We thought that was pretty good. And the results of the survey were as follows. We were surprised by this. We thought that people would be more concerned about the excessive speeding on our streets. But what the reality was, people were more concerned about lack of ADA compliant ramps, the crosswalk infrastructure, the lack of bicycle and pedestrian safety, crosswalk lights, and paths. Number two was what we expected was the excessive speeding. And number three was the volume of traffic through our neighborhood. And if you're not familiar with our neighborhood, we're dead center in between Johns Creek Boulevard to the north and King Road to the south. And then we have Linwood on the eastern border, and we get a tremendous amount of traffic east and west, mostly during rush hour traffic in the morning, going east, or going west, I mean, and then in the afternoon, going west. And so there's a big bottleneck at Bell Avenue, another bottleneck at Linwood. And as a result of that, and I live on Wichita, so I see this every day. You'll come down there and they'll be racing down. They'll have a bottleneck on both Johns Creek Boulevard and King Road. And so they'll start back at 55th and Stanley, and they'll race down both of those streets in both directions, trying to get around the traffic. They'll do the same thing on Wichita, only to find out that they got a bottleneck on the other. So we, as a matter of fact, one of our neighborhood association members refers to it as Stanley Speedway. But anyhow, so that were the three major areas. The streets that were of major concern were, as I said, Stanley Avenue, Wichita Avenue, 42nd, 43rd, King Road, and to a lesser extent, Logos, Mason, and 55th. So those were the major streets that we were concerned about. So we drafted our proposal in November of 2021. We finished our survey and drafted the final report. And we also drafted a proposal letter to be distributed to city council members, city staff. We did some work with Steve Adams. And if you remember right, on January 9th, Councilor Lisa Beatty at that time met us at Paul Michelle Park, and we walked around the neighborhood and checked things out. And I had to laugh because when it came to the bridge on Stanley, she jumped down underneath the bridge because she wanted to know what was underneath that bridge, how it's constructed. So we thought that was great fun. So And about that time, we discovered safe routes to school. And as a matter of fact, this guy is the one that discovered it. So, during all of this work that we were doing, we were told that nothing could be done unless it was on the TSP or the CIP. And that there was no funding for anything until that got completed. So we found out, we got into, that's when we met Nicole Perry. We found out about the program that took place at Linwood Elementary, because that was partially funded by Safe Routes to School. And so at that time, we discovered the Safe Routes to School program. In February 3rd of 2022, we started filling out our application for Seth Llewellyn Elementary School for the Project Identification Plan grant. And so on February, we had to have a letter of commitment from Seth Llewellyn School, and we got that. We also had to have a letter of commitment from the Road Authority, which in this case is City of Milwaukie. Steve Adams was kind enough to fill that out and finish that application. We filed the application on February 24th, and on May 4th, we got notice from ODOT Safe Routes to School that we had actually won this Safe Routes to School Project Identification Plan.
And that segues to my information. So, but before I get into how Safe Routes to School is operating in Milwaukie, I want to give you a backstory about what Safe Routes is. It's a programmatic effort by ODOT to improve traffic safety and routes in schools throughout the state. And this was established by the legislature in 2017. Now, there are two components to this program. The one is construction, and that's where you can get physical improvements to neighborhood streets, such as crossings, sidewalks, bike lanes, flashing beacons that make walking and biking safer for kids to and from school. There's also an education program, which is outreach to show kids how to be more effective and safer and more enjoyable being on the streets. It's designed to listen to students and families, teachers, school leaders, and work with existing organizations with particular attention to safe and fair outcomes for low-income students, students of color, students of all genders, and disabilities. So what are the benefits of Safe Routes? Well, with kids going to school, walking and biking to school, they're going to be more alert, they're going to be more refreshed, more creative, and that enhances their academic performance. You got less traffic congestion. So if you've got more kids on bikes, walking and wheeling their way to school, you got less congestion at drop off and pickup. And that improves conditions for pedestrians and bicyclists. Also, it makes a lot less stress on drivers. So there's a benefit there. You got safer streets. Communities with high rates of walking and rolling, they have lower crash rates. Motorists will drive more cautiously if they know there's kids and pedestrians out there on the street. You got lower costs. Families will use less gas getting their kids to and from school. Communities have spending less on maintaining and building roads, and school districts spend less on busing. Finally, economic gains. Neighborhoods that have sidewalks and bike paths and other investments in such infrastructure can increase home and neighborhood values. And studies show that businesses in walk-friendly neighborhoods have increased sales. Now, in 2024, there were solicitations begin for competitive grants for construction and education. And those are cities, counties, tribes, and school districts can apply, and they're on 2-year cycles. The construction grant solicitation will open next spring, so just about a year from now. And it's expected there will be, for the state, approximately $26 million in competitive construction grants. Education grants will also be available, and that starts in early spring, but this time next year. And those are for projects that start in the fall of October 24. Now, Safe Routes is not alien to Milwaukie, because Linwood Avenue project under the city of Milwaukie used Safe Routes dollars, and that has separated bike and pedestrian installation and striped crosswalks, flashing signals, targeting around Linwood Elementary. Webster Road under Clackamas County has sidewalk construction and crosswalk and bike upgrades at Bilquist Elementary to Roots Road. And at Fuller and Causey, Clackamas County has intersection improvements to Bennett Lot Whitcomb Elementary School. So that's the Safe Routes program. Now, with the award grant that Phil mentioned, let me describe how that affects us. That allows us to put together a project management team, and that was assembled in fall, and it consists of 6 members, 3 from Public Works, Steve Adams, Tessie Prentice, and Ben Green. Nicole Perry, who is the coordinator for Safe Routes to School for the county. Mason Brunstetter, very important person, the principal at Llewellyn High, and your most humble, obedient servant, myself, representing the Llewellyn Neighborhood Association. We're being guided by Alta Consulting. Now, they work with Milwaukie, and they are very familiar with guiding other communities and schools through this same process throughout the Willamette Valley under Safe Routes. Now, the goal of this project that the 6 of us are involved with for the next year is to produce an action plan. And that's going to produce construction design and recommendations to improve pedestrian and bike safety for Llewellyn students. The focus is on streets within 1 mile radius of Seth Llewellyn School. So here's the agenda. Started in the fall, we expect to complete it in the last quarter of 2023. We're doing background data, school safety assessment, a review process, finalizing the action plan, and then submit that application to ODOT, pending city council approval. So let me go through each of those. The background data we assembled the fall and winter of 2023. We reviewed projects under the Capital Improvement Plan and the TSP plan for both the city of Milwaukie and for Clackamas that have some pertinent impact on Llewellyn school safety. We examined crash test data for the neighborhood from 2018 to 2021. We looked at street and crosswalk and sidewalk conditions, their functionality and their ADA compliance. And we looked at vehicle speeding. Now, this is a very important point. Those sidewalk and crosswalk conditions and crash data and speed data were concentrated on Stanley, Logus, and Wichita, and particularly at the King and Stanley intersection. And they have a direct impact on student safety going to and from Llewellyn in the school boundary. This data confirms and validates that those issues which we've just described are the primary concerns and are high priority for the respondents of the survey that Phil just mentioned. So what you're seeing is a continuity from what people are seeing to the actual facts on the ground, or in this case, the facts on the street. So there's a reinforcement of what's going on. The next item will be in the spring, a school safety assessment. On April 13th, the site visit will be done by the project team at Llewellyn in the afternoon to see what the traffic patterns or congestion are like along Logus and at afternoon pickup. That'll be followed by meeting with the Llewellyn PTO to sort of highlight those concerns. We'll be doing some community outreach later in the spring with a public input survey in both English and Spanish, and doing a bike and pedestrian inventory. Then, review process in the spring and summer. This is where the sausage gets made, okay? Alta is going to be supervising the project team with 4 months of initial recommendations, team recommendations, assembling the plan, putting a draft together, sending it out for vetting to the community, bringing it back for revisions and amendments. And then by the fall and winter of 2023, there'll be a final revision and action plan. And then by December, we expect to bring you a Christmas present wrapped up in bows and ribbons. Just put it under the tree out front. That'll be an action plan that serves as a template for a construction grant application, which opens in January of 2024. Projects are eligible for up to $2 million per application. And those projects can be aligned with existing projects under the capital improvement plan and the transportation service plan of Milwaukie and Clackamas County. And those current efforts can serve as a cash match for that project, which significantly reduces the cost to the city. So that's where we're at, or where we've come from, where we're at now, and where we're going. So, yeah, any questions or comments, any concerns?
I think it's great. You've done a lot since we did that walk around. And it's it's kind of good timing because we're about to launch into the TSP process, right? And so you're working with some of the people on the committee who are involved in that. The person who's kind of heading that is sitting behind you, Laura Weigel. But also, assuming that things go well in the next few minutes of our meeting, your neighborhood chair will be on the TSP.
We noticed that.
Yeah. So you have a good
nice to have a ringer.
synergy there to, stay abreast and keep the TSP and you guys like informing each other. So that's great.
This, you're not only doing really good work, you look like you're having fun doing it. So that's even better.
This thing's taken off a life of its own.
Yeah.
I mean, we started at the goat farm, and you don't understand. You have no idea what her organizational skills are.
Oh, we do.
She brought us all back together, and we were out there sitting there, and she was in the background making up charts and flow charts and how this thing was going to go. And it literally took on a life of its own. And we found out about the safe routes to school, and we've been involved with that. And the other part of this thing that we haven't talked about is that this is also funded. We got some funding from the federal government under the IIJ, Information Infrastructure and Jobs Act. And the pot of gold right now is $92 million for the state of Oregon. That's just us. And so the Safe Routes to School Steering Committee at ODOT is looking for projects to do. We got to find some place to spend this money. And we want not only for our project, but we'd like to see other schools, because every school in the city of Milwaukie is a tier 1 school. And for the tier 1 schools, you get a 20% matching fund as opposed to a 40%. So we've already qualified for the tier 1.
And that comes from the high percentage of low income and students of color. That allows the match to go, the percentage match to go down to 20%. And all those projects that are currently going on under the TSP or under the CIP, they can reach back 5 years and they can be applied towards the cash match towards the city. So it's you're almost playing with house money. So it's really kind of nice in that respect. So, and that's part of the whole purpose of the Safe Routes. Okay.
Anybody else have any questions for?
May I make a comment?
Sure.
I just want to say thank you for your work and how dedicated you have both been to this process. It's been an honor to work with you for, has it really been 2 years on this? But
We're not done yet.
I know, I believe it. I want to say that when we first started, and I know when we first started really talking about what could be actionable around this, the conversation in the neighborhood association was really centered around a lot of pain, around a really traumatic experience that happened. And it was hard to move from that pain into a place of action. But I really appreciate that you both made that step and took that leadership. And the way that you have just, you dove into understanding systems that are not only just wonky systems of government, but wonkier systems of transportation, looking for opportunities, looking for ways to add capacity to the work that we're doing in Milwaukie. It's really been a great experience, and I'm glad that I've been able to work with you on it. And it makes me really happy to see that you're here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'd also, well, it's too bad that Nicole isn't here because she was an inspiration because, yeah, we're working on the groundwork that she laid.
Yeah,
And
Nicole and a couple of other parents in the
lot of
Llewellyn,
Yeah.
in the Llewellyn PTO, really got that off the ground and did a lot of volunteer work and did their own assessment and survey of the parents at the school. I remember going on a walking tour where they, had us start across Linwood in the neighborhood and see what it was like to cross Linwood Avenue with no sidewalks and no crosswalks. And so, yeah, she did a lot of great work. It parlayed it into a career. And and it's great to see you guys step forward the same way. I mean, you're not from inside the school, but it's great that you step forward to work with the school on that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a thing to do,
Every
Thanks
kid
again.
deserves
All
a
right, thank
safe
you.
route. Every kid deserves a safe route to school.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Every kid.
I live just stone's throw from Ball Michelle, and I see kids going down with their parents because crossing, especially some of the crossings at Stanley and Logus, Stanley and King, crossing Stanley to Ball Michelle, especially at drive time. And drive time, everyone's in a hurry. And Stanley's a cut through. That's a fact of life. So doing anything we can to enhance pedestrian and bike safety for kids not only serves the kids, but serves everybody else, right? So rising tide lifts everybody boat.
Oh. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to present.
Yeah, thank you for coming in. It's nice to have an update. Okay, community comments, and I know that Scott has at least one, so this is the part of the agenda during which council will hear community member comments regarding city business. For those in person who wish to speak, please submit a yellow comment card found on the table in the hallway. If you are on Zoom, please use the raise hand reaction to alert staff that you wish to speak. And when instructed to begin, click the microphone option to unmute yourself. If you're calling in through Zoom and would like to make a comment, dial *9 to raise your hand. You may also submit a comment via email to ocr@milwaukieoregon.gov. Before you make your comments, please state your name and city of residence for the record. If you would like the city to follow up with you, please submit your contact information to ocr@milwaukieoregon.gov. As council has other business items on the agenda this evening, speakers will be limited to 3 minutes each. Because information provided during community comments may be new, the city manager will respond at the next city council meeting to those comments that require follow-up. Before we begin, is there any follow-up from the January 17th community comments, Ms. Ober?
There were no comments.
Okay, thank you.
And actually, the comment card we received is for item 7B.
Oh,
So I'll
okay.
bring that to you here in a quick second. And we
Okay.
have no one on Zoom and no one has emailed us. And I see no other community cards.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, then we will move on to the consent agenda. Okay, great. Tonight's consent agenda includes minutes of the City Council January 3rd, 2023 work session and January 3rd, 2023 regular session. A resolution appointing the following individuals to the Transportation System Plan Advisory Committee: Naomi Vogel, Lane Christine Wilson, Chad Tucker, Adria Decker, Simon Zhu, Maitri Diermeyer, Zach Perry, Jared Irvin, Mark Steen, Daniel Eisenbeis, Stefan Lashbrook, Christine Giotti, Pam Denham, Corey Hester, and Jacob Sherman, and Rebecca Stavengord as the council representative, and Camden McCone and Sang Pao as alternates. A resolution authorizing a memorandum of understanding between the city and Dave's Killer Bread for the provision of $110,000 to fund the installation of electric vehicle chargers at city facilities. A resolution acting as the local contract review board establishing the guaranteed maximum price for the new city hall improvements. And an Oregon Liquor Control Commission application for Oak Union Brewing, 1887 Southeast Millport Road, Unit 310, a wholesale outlet. Does any member of council wish to remove an item from the consent agenda? No. So I would entertain a motion.
I move to present the consent agenda as presented.
I second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve this consent agenda as presented. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, please say no. None heard. Consent agenda passes unanimously. Okay. Electric vehicle strategy and EV infrastructure. So we have our Public Works Director, Peter Passarelli, and Climate and Natural Resources Manager, Natalie Rogers. And I think that's it, even though my script says Damien was going to be here.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Good to see you all and meet some of you for the first time. My name is Natalie. I'm the Climate and Natural Resources Manager. I work with our climate action plan and the implementation of the strategies and actions contained within. And I also manage our natural resources team over in our Public Works Department. So Peter and I work together on the implementation of our CAP, which also includes things around electric vehicles. So we're here today just to talk to you a little bit about electric vehicles. There was a question kind of around if there's a strategy or kind of what was the reasoning behind some of the location on some of the projects that we've been seeing here in Milwaukie around EV charging. So EVs means electric vehicle. And so what I have for you today is just a little bit of background, just because I know that since it's the first time we've met and talked, you haven't got to hear some of my thrilling study sessions where I kind of go over some EV 101 or electricity 101. And so I'm just going to give a tiny background on why we're interested in electric vehicles as a city. And then I'll talk a little bit about the projects. And then, of course, today we also have Peter Passarelli.
Good evening.
So I talk fast. So if you have a question, feel free to jump in, wave a hand, definitely flag me down and we'll take a little longer. So to start out, and it's a little bit blocked maybe by the Zoom, but hopefully you all are familiar with our climate goals as a community. So by 2030, Milwaukie will have no emissions from the generation of electricity. By 2035, our buildings will have net zero emissions from all building fuel types. And by 2045, we'll be a carbon neutral city. So that includes transportation, which is why we're interested in the topic of transportation for emission reduction. So in our 2020 greenhouse gas inventory, we saw that there was actually an increase in transportation emissions in our community. That's actually a trend that we saw regionally. A lot of communities started increasing in transportation emissions, and now we actually match closer to what the state sees as the largest sector being transportation for emissions, followed by building energy. Partially, oh, go ahead.
So that was a 2020 measure, and is that about COVID and people?
So that's a good question. So there's a big caveat when it comes with greenhouse gas inventories, I will say, especially when you're looking at a community the scale of Milwaukie, which is very small. In that greenhouse gas inventories are great trend setters. They show trends. I personally don't read them as an accurate value just because there's a lot of assumptions that get baked into greenhouse gas inventories. And we actually saw an assumption that came to light even in our 2020 inventory compared to our 2016, which is that ODOT actually cleaned up its data and reevaluated how it calculated emissions for transportation. And it actually showed an increase in transportation emissions that they weren't accounting for before. So we actually had to retroactively increase our 2016 emissions for that data cleanup. So really, when we're looking at greenhouse gas inventories, we're looking at things like population numbers on average. We're looking at how many residential homes compared to businesses, compared to industry or in communities. And then we take an average and we apply it based on those kind of community statistics. So, we don't know how many potentially, registered vehicles that aren't registered necessarily within the Milwaukie jurisdiction, but also occupy Milwaukie as roads and are, for maybe renters who are driving vehicles in Milwaukie. Those are good examples of why maybe we don't have precise data on what the emissions are, but what we do have is these trends that we can see, and it kind of can show us whether or not we're on the right trajectory on some actions based on the scale of the reductions that we're seeing or the scale of the increases. So in Milwaukie, we've been doing a lot of work on building energy. That's because we're kind of trying to figure out where the largest emission sources were. And in 2016, building energy was our largest emission source at that time. And we've been trying to reduce those through legislation, through advocacy, through renewable energy. Our transportation emissions, we have our vehicles and fuel strategies in our climate action plan. We have our land use and transportation actions. But as I mentioned, regionally, we've still been seeing these creeping transportation emissions. And that could be in Milwaukie potentially because people were driving closer to home. And so we're getting an increase in fuels purchases closer to home. So we're seeing a spike in transportation. But it's just a trend that we're also seeing around the nation, and that people are maybe traveling more. People are driving more. They're recreating more. They might be using more vehicles just in their home and work. So that's why it's important for us to start looking at ways to reduce emissions from transportation through a variety of strategies, including electric vehicles and electrification, but also, as we were just talking about, alternative transportation, bikes, walking, powering transportation through our bodies. But we're going to talk a little bit about electric vehicles in particular as one strategy to reduce emissions, simply because we know that vehicles are going to be around and we're going to be needing them for day-to-day life. If folks are interested in learning more about the greenhouse gas inventory for 2020, we are going to be including information in our update, but the larger kind of overview was in a council session in August 9th, 2022, and I put a link here, so hopefully if the presentation's uploaded, they can access that, or you can go back and watch that study session where we go over it a little more. And the memo is also attached there as well. So electric vehicles, why are we looking at electric vehicles instead of something like, hydrogen-powered vehicles or alternative gas vehicles? Well, that's because electricity in Oregon is already way less emitting than other fuel types. We use a lot of hydro here in the Pacific Northwest, which already means that when you're looking at the fuel sources in comparison, electricity is already in Oregon a less emitting source to power pretty much anything compared to other fossil fuels. And you can see here on the slide what I included. This is actually from USDOE, and the top shows the state averages for electric emissions compared to gasoline emissions for different fuel types, for different vehicle types. So you have plug-in hybrids, which are using both electricity and gasoline. You have complete hybrid vehicles, you have gasoline-powered vehicles, and then you can see all electric at the bottom is very, very small. As we continue to decarbonize our electricity grid as matched by our community goals, but then also as mandated actually now in our region, this that little green bar, that wedge for Oregon, will continue to decline. Now, what's left that we need to consider are things like life cycle emissions, meaning what are the emissions created when you're actually producing these electric vehicles? So actually, when we see research where it's the life cycle costs or emissions for all different vehicle types, including biofuels, diesel, natural gas, plug-in hybrids, battery EVs, you can see that the electric vehicles are already lower than those other vehicle types. And that's not to minimize the impact that comes from things like battery mining, right, for lithium and such. The nice part is as the market starts to adopt more electric vehicles, it's already going to see if it can find a cheaper and more readily available source for our batteries, right? So now we're starting to look at things like sodium. We're looking at things like, actually, when I went to school at Oregon State, there was a guy I worked with who was looking at Prussian blue, which is a dye for powering vehicles, which is actually water safe, which is why they're looking at it more for riparian areas, so it wouldn't pollute as much. So, it's not to minimize the impact that come with creating batteries. But at the same time, when we're looking at emissions over the entire life cycle, electric vehicles are already coming in way lower than other internal combustion engine or ICE vehicles, as they're called. In addition, electric vehicle batteries can have alternative uses once they are maybe reaching the capacity levels where maybe somebody says, this isn't getting me the mileage that I want before. So there's other technologies that are looking at repurposing batteries for things like large battery storage, data centers. There's also value in electric vehicle batteries where you can actually have bidirectional charging for your home, meaning that, say, when the power goes out, you can actually plug in your vehicle to your home, like I think a Ford F-150 Lightning.
The Ford Lightning and the Nissan Leaf, I mean, you can do bidirectional charging and power your home if you have that built infrastructure at your house to do that.
So there's other uses to these vehicles that we're starting to see how to leverage, particularly as we're using more electricity in our region, and it can actually stabilize our grid a little bit by contributing back. Electric vehicles also pulling even away from just purely greenhouse gas emissions and carbon emissions, they pollute less and other air quality emissions. Diesel, and that's why we don't have leaded gasoline anymore, actually cause significant public health impacts, and oftentimes disproportionately for communities of color, marginalized communities that live close to either where those fossil fuels are created or extracted from, or where they're most heavily burned. So there's a lot of value in electric vehicles. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done on making sure that it's accessible and obtainable for everyone. And there's recent legislation to hopefully further some of that work and a lot of incentives. If folks are interested in incentives, Go Electric Oregon is a good website where it states kind of all of the state incentives for electric vehicles and electric charging. But then also, with the federal Infrastructure Act and such coming down, there's going to be even more rebates coming down the pike. So I encourage folks to kind of keep aware. Go Forth, or Forth Mobility, is a local nonprofit that focuses on electrified transportation all across the transportation spectrum. And they're a great advocate that really works to bring information to folks. And they are not, of course, they don't sell electric vehicles themselves. They're not in it to make a profit. It's just they actually even have a showcase downtown where you can kind of play around and see what EVs are available.
The one other thing I'd mention about electric vehicles too is the maintenance. So, we certainly have noticed in our Public Works Department with the fleet that we have on those vehicles that the maintenance is dramatically lower than internal combustion engine. There's not as much fluid replacements that you have to do. There's not as many moving parts, mechanical parts that internal combustion engine has. So, frankly, some of the mechanics are afraid of what the future holds for maintenance. Their roles and responsibilities in maintaining EV fleets. So there's a dramatic difference in those maintenance requirements for those vehicles.
Mm-hmm. And so that's part of this kind of when I'm not going to focus too much on a sales pitch on electric vehicles, but I will say that's part of the calculation that needs to go into when folks are considering something like an electric vehicle. Unfortunately, EVs, as we see, do have a higher purchase-in or buy-in price. And so, but once you kind of can buy in, there's kind of a lower maintenance continued cost. So it's kind of helping folks overcome that initial purchase, can actually really help folks who don't necessarily have the finances to do things like oil changes, do things like, I was already bad at oil changes. And I will tell you, I am a true Oregonian and I hate pumping gas. I think I've done it a handful of times and I I refuse. And I bought myself a used Nissan Leaf a couple years ago now, and I love it because I just drive home and I just plug it in my driveway, and I can be stubborn all I want and say that I'm not going to pump gas. So we'll see how true that holds, but it's my New Year's resolution. We'll see. So that's why we want electric vehicles here in the community. We want people to be able to have electric vehicles. But there's a lot of things that you need for an electric vehicle that already exist for internal combustion engine vehicles, like gas stations, right? So gas stations are privately owned. They have a market, so they get put everywhere. Gas stations also have a large risk and impact on surrounding communities. But EV chargers have less of a risk when it comes to things like pollution, especially resiliency for fuels. And that's actually why we have some actions in our climate action plan around that. But we still need more chargers, particularly for folks who don't necessarily have a driveway like I do to be able to plug in, or maybe folks who, an overnight level 1 charger, which we can see is the smallest, it's the slowest charger. That's kind of your trickle charge, as it's kind of called. And that just uses a standard outlet like what you see around the walls here. They might need a faster charger, especially if you're sharing a spot and sharing a charger with other people. So that's why there's a lot of work being done to advocate on where these chargers go and why we need them. A level 2 charger is what we commonly see around communities, around businesses, and that's kind of your, it's a 240 volt. It's like what you would plug your washer or dryer into, right? It just takes a little bit more of a dedicated circuit or with a panel. You may have to make sure your panel's up to date. I have to get a panel upgrade in my own home because I have a 1963 home with about like 110 volts that I pop constantly. So that's, if I wanted to install a charger in my house, I would probably need to get a level 2 charger and a panel upgrade. Luckily, if there's lots of incentives, you can go online and you can find those incentives. A level 3 charger, that's what you call a fast charger or DC fast charger, sometimes it's referred to. This is your supercharger. This is what you think of when you're plugging in and 20 minutes later you're pulling out of there. DC fast chargers are fantastic. That's what we're gonna need in the future because the larger batteries you get, the power is going to move through at the same rate, which means that eventually your level 1s are going to be a teeny tiny trickle and your level 2s will become your overnight. Think of Daimler, actually, in Portland is electrifying its e-Cascadia. It's like a large electric semi-truck. They would not be able to use a level 2 charger. Even a level 3 charger is like their trickle charger. So over time, we need to start moving up these charger stations in terms of capacity. But as you move up, so do the cost, which is why we look at things like when you're developing a building, when you're building a building, being considerate of these chargers and what infrastructure is required for them when you're actually constructing, because it's way cheaper.
Natalie, I'm wondering for the level 3 chargers, what sort of existing infrastructure do you need to have in place and how easy is it to retrofit certain areas to be able to accommodate a level 3?
That's a great question, and I'm not 100% sure on retrofitting. I do know that usually you need a dedicated vault with that electrical, the wiring and such, and you need to be able to ensure that you're close enough to those power lines so that you're not running those high voltage conduit underground for a larger, or if you are, just being prepared that that's going to be more costly because it's a lot of trenching underground. You don't see.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at that level 3 charger, you're going to be working with the utility, your utility, whether it's PGE in our case here in Milwaukie, or Pacific Power in the region as well. But you'll be working with them to determine what if they have the appropriate infrastructure there to install a level 3 charger. Those are generally going to be more a commercial installation where, the cost associated right now with the level 3 charger, it's upwards to $100,000. So, they're going to be looking at, do they have the appropriate infrastructure there, the right size transformer and the service to that facility to provide that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you can kind of like go up the magnitude of cost, but then also, what labor is required. So like level 1 charger, you get that when you buy your vehicle. It's just like a cord. A level 2, you're going to probably work with an electrician at your own residential home to install it. A level 3, you're going to need a commercial electrician and working with your utility.
I would say the other thing too with that level 3 charger, PGE, the utilities, they actually have programs to work with their customers to install that, and they actually assist in some cases with some of the infrastructure to make sure that you have the service requirements there to install those larger fast chargers.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. We have a level 2 at our house, which is on a dedicated circuit off of a sub panel. We needed to do some upgrades as well to make that happen. But I guess I'm kind of curious about what the potential is for tapping into utility poles and, providing dedicated parking spaces that are EV accessible so that people can charge up around the community.
Why, that is a great segue for a project we'll talk to you about.
Okay.
It's great. And actually you can see in that top picture on the right, I actually pulled that from City of Portland. So what we're seeing are folks, right, who don't have a driveway, who don't have a closed panel, actually running charging cords across sidewalks, and they're running it already across the right of way to access for street parking. There's even pilot programs in like California. That really is where some of these private chargers that are located in the right of way have started. However, there's a lot of difficulties when it's a private charger in the right of way around, say, maintenance and operation, and then also questions of fairness of dedicated parking spots and such. So there's a new thing we'll talk to you about, which is kind of a potential solution to some of these lack of right of way chargers.
And I would just point out, that's not that's a dangerous thing to do.
We're not promoting that.
Right, the extension cord, using an extension cord with a charger, even if it's a level 1 charger, is dangerous. That the most extension cords that you buy aren't built to handle that type of load, and can cause problems and probably melt in many cases. So.
I agree, Peter, but you know what? I got to put out some cones and some electrical matting. I'm trying.
Like it's taped. It's taped.
I'm not going to find most people.
Yes, for anyone listening, do not do that. Instead, find yourself, the bottom picture is actually me pulling into my Walmart pharmacy, and they have about 10 fast chargers that are Charge America, I think is what the program is. But a lot of commercial businesses, it's a draw to your site. And so they're actually starting to install a lot of fast chargers just to pull people in. And sure enough, I found myself walking around and probably buying way more things that I need just because I wanted to spend my 20 minutes charging. So there's different opportunities, different charging. But, as we start to need more, even like, say, if you needed 2 level 2 chargers in your own home, it's starting to get to the point where the grid is taking into consideration the number of chargers that we're needing. And fortunately, we have an electric utility who's thinking about this and sees a lot of opportunities for projects, which is another teaser. So, talking about need for chargers, our own city operations have been increasingly electrified, which means that we need city chargers as well. So we have actually electric vehicles for pretty much every campus, in use at every campus. Predominantly, I would say, our Johnson Creek campus, where we have our public works, our community development, and our engineering team. But then also we have electric vehicles for our public safety building and our police department, as well as our here at City Hall. And so in total, we have 7 plug-in hybrid electric vehicles.
I would correct that. That's 3 plug-in hybrid electric vehicles.
Okay. I don't know. I have my list. But I think we do have quite a few, 3 plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. We have 8 purely electric vehicles, which includes Nissan Leafs, but it also includes some kind of more test vehicles like a Tesla. We actually have a Mach-E with our public safety as well. We just recently got our first Ford F-150 Lightning for our own utility crews, and we have one on the way, hopefully, once those orders are fulfilled, because we're seeing a lot of demand for them in our region. But overall, as Peter mentioned, we've been seeing a lot of success with these vehicles because they're very low maintenance, particularly in a community like Milwaukie, where you have low mileage in general. It's a small community, so we don't necessarily have to go very far. And the battery capacity on these vehicles, even on our 2014 Leafs, which we're still rocking over at Johnson Creek campus, which has something like a 60-mile range, lasts us still quite a few days, a couple days at least, without another charge. So, but as we continue to electrify our fleets, we're going to need more chargers. And that's just, for our own city operations, let alone folks who are visiting our buildings and are also looking for that accessible charging location. So one, and I forgot to put the source up there, I apologize. This is actually PlugShare. There's a website called PlugShare if folks are interested in. It's a map of all public electric vehicle chargers. The green chargers are level 2, and the orange are DC fast chargers. You can see Milwaukie, of course, is in kind of more of like the top left corner. But I kind of took a larger view because I do think it's important to include the large cluster, which is right around Clackamas Town Center. Of course, there's more demand for those chargers. The one thing that this map doesn't show is where there's high demand. But I just wanted folks to see, if, in case you're interested on where there are chargers, there are some. However, you can see there's definitely a lack of chargers, at least public chargers. These are only public ones. These don't account for things like a multifamily development that installed chargers for its residents. This is like publicly accessible, usually pay to charge. So a lot of work still needs to be done in order to kind of fill in some gaps. The challenge, of course, being when you're looking at things like commercial charging installations, the top, I would say the north kind of east area of Milwaukie, that's a lot of residential. So it's kind of where to strategically place them around the community. There are a couple projects that are happening, hopefully, to solve that. So PGE, Portland General Electric, is our electric utility partner. They are working to electrify the transportation sector as well because they know that this is going to have a large impact on the grid, right? So they want to be an active participant. Back in 2019 was the grand opening of Electric Avenue, which is just right across the street. That was actually the second Electric Avenue in PGE's suite of future community electric avenues. So Milwaukie was once again kind of like one of the initial cities for some of these PGE projects, which is pretty cool. And we had, I think it was 4 DC fast chargers and 3 level 2 chargers. So it created kind of that commuter location for folks in downtown Milwaukie. It was a city-owned property, so we were able to give permission for the charger installation there. And PGE was excited about it because it had high visibility, and then also it's right next to McLaughlin or 99. The next project that we're actually working on with PGE is on-pole charging in the right-of-way. And that's because PGE owns those electric poles, those utility poles. And so they pretty much asked the city, hey, are you guys okay if we install level 2 chargers that are public on the electric utility poles? And that would be primarily, they wanted to site locations that were around affordable housing. They wanted to site locations that are around multifamily housing to address that constraint, which is where do those folks actually go to charge?
And I would add, so this project that they've installed 3 chargers right now. So there's 2 on 28th and 1 on 29th. And it's a demonstration project. So they've also done a demonstration project like this in Portland. And they have a subsequent pilot phase that's PUC approved, so where they can use rate dollars to do this. So we're in the process of finalizing an agreement with them to do this. So they've sent us an agreement. Kelly Tucker's taken a look at it. We sent some comments back to them, and that second phase is much more spread out throughout the community. I think they've identified 21 potential sites in Milwaukie, not just in the historic Milwaukie neighborhood, but other parts of the community, off on Lake Road, off on Wichita, so Roswell, and different parts in the community. Part of what they're looking for is that, they have the adequate infrastructure, public parking is available, on-street parking is available, and that it's close to, residential places, and also some, as Natalie mentioned, some affordable housing places as well. So there'd be a demand for those sorts of things.
So when you say it's a demonstration project, does that mean they actually, they were just using sort of test subjects? They weren't making it really publicly available yet?
Well, they're not making it publicly available yet, and I believe they're not using the rate dollars. They're using another source of funding that they have available, and they're sort of testing and testing the program to see, how to set up the infrastructure. What are those sort of the problems that they have? So on the 3 installations that they've put in right now, they're not operational yet.
Okay.
So they've got the transformer, they have the charger up on there, but they don't have that customer interface. So you'll be able to, the customer, once they have it put into place, and they said, within the next 30 to 45 days, they're going to have those pieces put in on the 28th and 29th streets. The customer will be able to go and plug in, but they'll be, swipe their card and pay for the electricity.
So for that phase 1, that is the demonstration project that did not use ratepayer dollars. That just used PGE's own private investment dollars. And you can actually see that's that kind of bluish photo that's in the middle, where you can actually see the charger dangling down. That's way up on the utility pole, so nobody can grab it. And as Peter mentioned, they'll be installing some additional infrastructure to actually kind of bring that down and make it a public charger, to actually showcase and see how it's being used. The second phase, of course, of the 21 chargers, those ones, they now learning from the demonstration project, that's when they got the Public Utility Commission, or PUC, approval to actually spend electric utility customer dollars on EV charging. The cool part, in my opinion, about an electric utility actually running these chargers is that electric utilities and any investor-owned utility in Oregon is actually regulated by the Public Utility Commission, meaning that there's oversight. There's things like considerations to low-income programming. So PGE, talking to their staff, one of the considerations they want to do is some sort of program for folks to apply and qualify for low-income charging, like lower charging costs. So that's kind of an oversight that's provided. There, of course, the reason why they need to go to the Public Utility Commission is because a utility in Oregon, an investor-owned utility, is a monopoly, right? They have a large market control. And so there are concerns just making sure that there's kind of this free market of EV charging. And so that's kind of why they need to continue to go back to the Public Utility Commission to get permission to spend dollars and to do this type of work.
I'll let everyone know when it's operational because it's across the street from my house.
Oh, perfect. You can go see it dangling in the wind and say, yes, it's windy today.
I have a question. I didn't know that this was a thing until a couple months ago, that there are people who don't have electric vehicles who park in these spots, like truck owners, for example, and they park in EV spots so people can't charge their cars. They do it at Fred Meyer, and they actually ran one over. They knocked it out.
I believe
and
it.
still hasn't been replaced.
Wow.
So is that something that's a concern?
On the pilot, phase 2, the pilot program, part of what PGE has asked for in that agreement is to designate those spaces as EV spaces. So they would be marked as an EV space, similar to what we've done downtown here. So I don't anticipate that we're going to be, going out there and doing enforcement on that, but we would mark it as an EV space just to, to say that this is for EV. Parking?
It's definitely a challenge. And it's I will say that is like one of the few things I'm like, oh, maybe I should write them a note and put it on their, and I never do because who has paper on them these days anyways. But, it's definitely frustrating, especially when there already is limited charging infrastructure around and I've been in the position where I'm getting it's like they don't even tell me how many miles I've left on my vehicle, just blinking. And I'm like, oh gosh. And I'm rolling up to a charger and it's occupied by, a large diesel truck or something. But, that's also why having more charging infrastructure, because, things will be going offline. Things will be, who knows, site condition where you maybe can't wedge your vehicle in. And so just making sure that there's a diverse set on multiple locations is important. But yes, that is a common frustration that I think a lot of folks have been seeing and sharing. So, we work with PGE really closely on a lot of projects. These are just some of them. PGE also offers a lot of incentives for both installing chargers in your home, doing panel upgrades. They offer incentives for multifamily and commercial on DC fast chargers. I was just actually looking it up, and they offer, it's like up to $25,000 per port for a DC fast charger for commercial, up to $36,000 per site with kind of a charge or a dollar amount per port for multifamily, which is going to be really important, especially as communities like Milwaukie, you have EV requirements or incentives where people want to install EV chargers and they're needing to figure out how to do the math to do that. So the other new exciting project that we're here to talk to you about are the new public chargers that we're going to be installing at city facilities, which you just saw the MOU for. So these are 3 new level 2 chargers that are actually public facing at city facilities. So this actually helps both charge our own operational vehicles, our own city vehicles, but then also it provides spaces for members of the public, say on weekends or on when they're not occupied by a city vehicle, they can actually pull up and charge. And so the city would be managing these. We would be both installing them and we would be operating them, but they were funded by essentially a mitigation payment from Dave's Killer Bread for an air quality, alleged air quality violation. And instead of paying those dollars to DEQ, they're able to fund a environmental or community project that has some sort of air quality benefit. So they chose to put those dollars back in the community for Milwaukee's public chargers, which is really cool.
Can I just ask, how did they approach the city, or did you hear about the fine and you approached them? They approached the city? Yeah?
Mm-hmm. I will say though, just to be clear, we were planning on putting these chargers in and we're able to leverage their dollars and save our general fund facilities dollars for other purposes.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And in fact, we actually started today. We had one of the electricians out at JCB starting some of the initial work on that charger.
Mm-hmm. Yes, they did come to us and they asked us, hey, we want to invest back into the community in these projects. Do you have any ideas? And so we kind of gave them a suite of ideas and they said, this one sounds like something that really resonates. So it's $110,000, which is a good amount, which we're really appreciative for. And the benefit being these chargers are going to be installed on city property, which means that we get to actually make sure that they're operating the way that we need them to, that we're going to continue the maintenance of them, and they're going to be powered by city electricity, which, as I've shared before, is 100% carbon-free from actually our purchase of carbon-free electricity through a large solar generation farm in Eastern Oregon that's going online this year, which is really exciting. So essentially any vehicle that powers up at a city public charger that we own, and actually it's PGE, the electric avenue is the same, is powered by renewable energy, which is really exciting. So those are the big projects that are going to be happening around the community. Our public chargers at city facilities, the public chargers on pole electricity poles around the community, and then we also have the existing public chargers in downtown Milwaukie. We're also going to be seeing hopefully some either public or private or mix of both chargers through our EV Ready code and the installation incentives that we adopted or in the process of adopting. And then, as the state of Oregon continues to advocate, as well as our, hopefully our nation on advocating for electric vehicles and providing incentives for chargers. Hopefully we'll see more installed as the market kind of increases in their adoption as well.
A couple more items on this. So, one of the approach that we took on these chargers were in citing them was we were looking at, what are the facilities, what is the properties that we have control on. So, two of those properties are the library and the public safety building. So they're certainly closer to the river and on the western side of the community. And then we have our Johnson Creek campus. We do have another fleet charger that we're going to be installing as part of the new City Hall project. So Damien is working on that. That will be underneath in the garage bay, but that will be more for fleet charging.
And I will say too, PGE, in case anyone's interested in listening, particularly if they're a business that has their own fleet, there are specific, or actually even for residential, there are even programs for charging that aren't necessarily on the installation. It's more like the timing of charging that gives you incentives. So there's residential programs on timing charging to make sure that we're not all charging at the same time. There's also commercial programs and even fleet specific programs where they actually can help pay for the installation of some chargers as long as you sign up your fleet, and then particularly, timing the charging of your massive amount of vehicles potentially that you're charging at the same time. So that way it's well timed with the demand of the grid. So there's a lot of incentives out there. Definitely reach out to both Portland General Electric. I recommend reaching out to Energy Trust of Oregon as well, or if anything, reach out to Fourth Mobility for kind of that broad suite. We're going to hopefully be updating our city this information keeps changing and more keep coming. And that's the type of information that usually I share at outreach events, timed during the event, whatever opportunities are currently around. The city hopefully will be a hub for this information as well, but PGE and them are the ones actually providing those incentives. So they have the most detailed information on who qualifies and what's the rate.
And do they have incentives for commercial? Like, it seems to me like the King Road Safeway and the Wichita, the place on King Road, the Wichita Shopping Center are both like great places where it would be great to have some. And how do we try to make that happen?
Yeah, they do have incentives for them. I mean, of course, installing new level 2 chargers are always going to be more expensive when you're retrofitting rather than installing when you're building, which is why we have those legislation or that, those code that really incentivizes that. But it looks like right now when I took a peek at PGE's page on incentives, they have up to $7,000 per port for commercial for level 2. Or up to $8,300 per port for multifamily with maximums, I think, of $36,000 per site. So there are definitely incentives for commercial charging for level 2 charger installations, which is really cool.
I have a question, with discussing and talking through all this. Obviously, with the more EVs on the road, obviously we're going to get less gas tax revenue. Does the city generate any revenue from these electric charging stations that we do provide right now?
These three, there will be revenue coming from those.
But the Electric Avenue, there's no.
The Electric Avenue, no, we don't get any revenue. That's PGE's facility.
We don't charge them for the.
We have our franchise agreements with PGE for using the right of way. And so there is some kind of like by operating in Milwaukie, there's Milwaukie specific revenue that comes from that. In addition, they're so regulated by the Public Utility Commission on making profits off of kind of rate dollars that particularly for things like Electric Avenue or things like these on-pole chargers, they are really watched, and usually I don't believe that they can actually, if rate dollars go into it, they have to ensure, the Public Utility Commission ensures that there's a fair charge and fair rate and profit actually coming off of it. That usually just goes back into either the program or the operation.
This has been an investment and a partnership. So one of the things that I really appreciate about what Natalie does is she leans into the relationship with PGE for us to be a front runner on these items. So if I'm correct, I believe that there is some remuneration for use of the stalls, but there is not a monthly fee that we capture.
But you're saying on the
ones
the
we
new
don't- yeah.
ones, we're going to get a percentage or what?
On the new ones, we will get, we'll get a fee based off of the customer's usage of that electricity.
Because of the energy that we're generating on our own, right? So the more self-sustaining we become, that's how we can essentially create more revenue.
Yes, and it's going to pay for the energy that the customer is using to charge their car, plus a minimal charge to that.
But since we own and operate them, we have the ability to set that fee.
Right, which, yeah, okay. So we should do more of those.
I also just wanted to jump in. We're about 10 minutes over and we do have the consultant online for the housing component of our agenda tonight. So I just wanted to give a time check. Look at that. It's perfect. Thank you.
Oh, you're good.
I've learned. You should have seen me 4 years ago. There was about 10 more slides.
Well, I guess I'd be very curious when we get to the point of, getting to an agreement on the 21 additional chargers to see how they're distributed. Because I am a little, from your map, and your map exacerbated my concern that we have a real gap between Clackamas Town Center and McLaughlin Boulevard is where they all are. And then sort of everything in between.
We can do that.
Yeah.
We'll get that to you.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, it looks like when the list that they showed us initially does look like they're more dispersed around the community.
Yeah, great. Any other questions before they move on?
Very quickly, I just think that map and the distribution would also be really helpful when we're thinking about neighborhood hubs and increased commercial density in certain neighborhoods, because Llewellyn was one of those areas that's like an EV desert. But there's also, very dense residential in the zoning there. So I don't know, something to keep in mind.
Great.
I'm sure our planning team is
Nodding.
definitely going to have me in some of these TSP conversations. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council.
Thank you.
All right, our next item is the preliminary housing production strategy presentation by Community Development Director Joseph Rilio and Planning Manager Laura Weigel. And I think they have a consultant they're introducing, whose name I do not have.
Good evening. Hey, Council, nice to see you all again. We were just here a few weeks ago for the first part of our kind of work that we've been doing, tackling housing or continuing to tackle housing issues here in the city. So a couple of weeks ago, we came in and we talked about the housing capacity analysis, which kind of digs really deep into the folks that live here in Milwaukie and kind of what their burden is and their housing costs are. And so what we're doing with the second phase is going in and talking about what kind of housing production strategies we can build on, because Joseph and Joseph's team have been working on these strategies for several years through the Milwaukie Housing Affordability Strategy Action Plan. So we are bringing kind of a recap of some of that work that's been done, and then we're going to start to build on that as well. It's a new requirement of the state, which I think is really wonderful because there is such a housing crisis in Oregon. So they put forth House Bill 2003, which basically tells jurisdictions that we have to come up with plans in order to produce housing. Milwaukee's ahead of the curve. We've been doing this work for a while. There's a lot of jurisdictions that are behind us, but we still have a long way to go. And so tonight we're going to, Beth Goodman, who was with us last time as well, is going to kind of do a deep dive and answer any questions and see if we've got the strategies right and talk a little bit about next steps. And with that, Beth, hello, welcome.
Hello, thank you very much for having us here, for having me here. I'm just going to get my PowerPoint going, and do y'all see that on your screen?
Yep.
Hopefully the big version.
Yes, we do.
So as Laura was saying, we're picking up with where we left off when we talked a few weeks ago, where you were interested in the housing capacity analysis, but what you really wanted to talk about was housing policy. So we've been working with our project committee on developing the housing production strategy and the actions to include in it over the last few months. And here we are about midway through that, about to draft our the full draft housing production strategy document. So before we do that, we want to get your feedback on where we are. We've got 2 more meetings with our advisory committee, the HCTC, in March and in April. We've obviously been working on this. Gosh, it's almost been a year now. So continuing to progress on this, and we expect to be finished up by May. The city has a grant from the state, from the Department of Land Conservation and Development, that needs to be completed by the end of May. So that is what we are on, the schedule that we are on right now. So it's just going to dive into the potential actions for inclusion in the housing production strategy that we've been talking about. So before we get into the actual actions, I think it's useful for you to understand, once the city has its housing production strategy and the council has adopted it, which is not a formal adoption process, it's not a land use document, but made a resolution that you're going to implement the strategy, and the strategy has been submitted to the state that way. What is the city's responsibilities? Well, I like to think of it as the city is committed to make a good faith effort at implementing the actions in the HPS. You're going to be required to update the Department of Land Conservation and Development, DLCD, on the progress as you're implementing actions. And there is this is a 6-year action plan. There's a midpoint review that the city will need to do at year 3 as part of the monitoring process. And then when you do your next housing capacity analysis and housing production strategy, you're required to comment on the effectiveness of the actions. Some of them may be more effective at getting the desired outcomes than others. But then also realize that this is a 6-year period. Think about how much has changed in the last 6 years. There's an expectation that the city probably will need to adjust some of the actions in the housing production strategy over the 6-year period, and there's space for that. So if the actions that we have here today and that we have in May, it turns out 2 or 3 years from now, there's something that's not quite working right, or there's something that you really want to add in and swap something else out, perhaps, there's space to do that. This is meant to be something of a living document. Strategies not identified in the housing production strategy, of course, the city can implement them over the next 6 years, whether or not you change your HPS or not to reflect them. So it's not that you're completely tied in. If you think about this, it's, a good faith effort, trying to, meet the spirit of the law as well as the letter of what you're saying in the HPS. So what we're hoping that you'll discuss with us this evening is tell us whether you have any questions about the actions that are proposed to be included in the HPS, what you need more information about. Are these the right actions to include in the HPS? Should anything be added? Are there actions that we're including right now that should be left out of the HPS? And realize that for the actions that we're talking about in the housing production strategy, this is a 6-year action plan. So all of the details of these actions aren't in the HPS, because you're going to have public processes to implement a lot of these, and they're going to unfold over time. So what we're trying to do in the housing production strategy is state clearly what the action is and what the city's involvement could be. And then the implementation steps of that are going to be figuring out exactly how this would work in Milwaukie. So I'll walk you through 1 or 2 of those as we go through this. Before I go on, are there any questions?
No, I'm not seeing any.
Okay, thank you. So of course, a big part of this is stakeholder outreach. So on the left, we've got what we've done to date. We did an Engage Milwaukie activity and a survey on housing needs last fall. We've met with the Equity Steering Committee to get their input about the draft actions and about who we should talk to in addition to the Equity Steering Committee. We've had 5 meetings with our Housing Capacity Technical Committee, and 1 meeting with the Planning Commission and 1 meeting with the City Council. Our upcoming outreach is that we've got another Engage Milwaukie activity that's going to be about sharing information about the housing strategies and possibly may include some feedback on the strategies. We're doing interviews with service providers and housing developers to talk with them about the strategies that we're looking at and to make sure that those strategies are aligning with what they understand the people that they serve or the people that they're developing for, what their needs are. An additional 2 meetings with our advisory committee, and perhaps 1 more meeting with the Planning Commission and 1 more with the City Council, depending on what we hear this evening. So this is a reminder about the survey findings from the October 2022 Engage Milwaukie survey. So the focus of that survey was really about providing information about the housing capacity analysis and then asking some initial feedback about what issues that people who responded to the survey had with housing in Milwaukie and what they were concerned about. So long-term affordable housing, that there not being enough of it and needed to be more of it. Increased access to goods and services that are accessible by bike and walking. More affordable rental options for households, especially with those with income below $50,000. Preserving and maintaining existing housing and preventing housing displacement. So all of these fall under the umbrella of what's in a housing production strategy. Don't get too hung up on the word production, because that's of course about development, but preservation and anti-displacement are also pieces of this. So it's all part and parcel. It doesn't have to be about building new housing. It can be about making sure that the housing you've got continues to be affordable. So as Laura said, Milwaukee's been doing a lot of things over the last quite a few years. You adopted a construction excise tax and you've been collecting money from that. We'll talk about how that is being used in a few minutes. You've got an urban renewal district and a portion of that urban renewal district is allocated to fund affordable housing projects and housing projects. You've had a rental relief program where you did several rounds of emergency rent relief. You've looked at potential fee reductions and waivers for affordable housing projects. We'll talk about some more options for that. And you'd adopted the nonprofit low-income tax exemption, which is a property tax exemption for housing that's affordable to households earning less than 60% of median family income. That's income restricted housing. You've done other things also, but we only wanted to give you 1 slide of some of the highlights of what you've done. So as we're talking about the actions in just a few moments, when we talk about level affordability, it focuses on incomes, the actions here focus on incomes below 120% of median family income. And often we're focusing at 80% or less of median family income. So those are your low and sometimes your moderate income households, as well as your extremely low and your very low income households. We talk about impact for development. A lot of the actions that we have here may have a small or a moderate, a medium impact for development. So in and of themselves, they may not result in a whole lot of new housing development or preservation of new housing, but you have to think of these actions as interlocking together and building on each other. And we'll talk about that a little bit as we go through. So even though something looks small, when you combine it with 3 or 4 other small things, it may well be medium or large. We consider the administrative complexity. So how much staff time is going to be required to implement and administer the action? We also consider whether an action might be particularly expensive and where we have information about how you might pay for that, looking at some of those options. We think about community and political acceptability. So feasibility for implementing the actions, where you might need to coordinate with other organizations. So just because something is hard doesn't mean it's not worth doing. but it is important to know that something might well be hard. And then flexibility. Is the action, can it be used to achieve multiple outcomes, or does it focus pretty narrowly on one outcome? And either answer can be helpful. Sometimes you need an action that really is laser focused, and sometimes you need an action that can be used in a lot of different ways. So as a reminder, the actions in a housing production strategy, they build on previous plans. So what we're doing as we're developing the housing action plan is we're trying to provide context for how the actions here connect to the MHOS, which was developed in 2018 and is very detailed. The city has done some of the things in the MHOS, but there are many of the things in the MHOS that still need to be done. And also connect it with your new comprehensive plan policies. That way the city can track what's been talked about being done previously, how that fits in with the actions in the HPS, and also what the city's comprehensive plan policies envision happening. So this will allow Joseph and Laura to track on these things over the years better and not lose previous work. So now I'm going to hop right into the actions unless anybody has any questions. Okay.
I think not seeing any.
Okay. So one of the actions, Action A, is about developing a land bank strategy and partnerships that support affordable housing development. So this could be housing that's affordable up to 120% of median family income. It could be housing that's ownership or rental. And the level of affordability is going to depend on the tenure and the type of housing that's being developed. So you could look for land banking. The options are looking at, say, city-owned land. So, pardon me, I'm going too fast. Land that the city owns that is surplus to needs. Or the city could use funding it already has, such as from urban renewal, which we'll talk about in a bit, for parcel assembly. So assembling several parcels together, and it could convey this land to, say, a developer of income restricted housing. It could convey this land to, say, a partner in a community land trust or a housing co-op where they're looking at affordable home ownership opportunities. Those opportunities could be affordable at up to 120% of median family income. Or they could be targeted at lower income households. So households, say, earning 80% of median family income. These are all different ways, basically, of getting control of land and being able to put the land into the development process because control of land is important, partially because land is expensive, but partially because once you own the land and you can control where you're directing it to, you get to decide what happens with it. So this has been a set of strategies that are very much in the MHOS and in your comprehensive plan policies and correspond very much with those. This is one of the strategies that has the possibility of having a moderate to large impact, depending on how much land we're talking about. And the city can interact in different levels. So if it was partnering, say, with a community land trust or a housing co-op, in addition to land, the city could look at what are the opportunities to support the development of that new housing. So through helping the developer through the development process, looking at other actions that we'll get to a little bit later to lower development costs, those kind of things. So there's a lot of different ways that this could work.
So I did have a couple questions about this. I guess there were sort of more overarching questions about a lot of the actions, which is I was surprised by how many of them the city's role was the lead role as opposed to a partnership role. And I think this one was listed as the city having a lead role. But now that you talk about it, I mean, it does sound like there's, I mean, the city, if the city owns the land, the city owns the land, but the actual establishment of a land trust or something would be with through another partner, would not be something the city would do. Am I correct about that?
You're correct. I mean, a city could establish a land trust, but they don't often. And so I think philosophically, the housing production strategy is generally focused on bigger strategies where the city has more of a leading role. There's lots of things that the city might do that are less time intensive for the city, where the city is a partner. And so the opportunity comes and the city provides a partner role. And they aren't necessarily documented in the HPS. But if you're going to be held in one way or another responsible for accomplishing things in your HPS, then it should be something that the city has a little more control over.
Okay.
There certainly will be partnership opportunities.
Okay. And the other question is something we've talked about. In fact, we may have talked about it last time you were here, which is the city's had a difficulty in finding a partner to be the cop on whether a unit stays affordable, to police that long-term staying affordable. I know that, if you work with known nonprofits, there's probably a commitment to keeping them affordable. And I know there's some financing tools, some federal financing things that developments might use that require them to keep it affordable and sort of take that burden off the city. I guess I wondered, in looking through these, can we limit or can we focus on those kind of things that already have a mechanism for enforcement, or can we not? I guess that's my question.
I would say mostly yes. And there's a few places as we go through this that I'll talk about where you might think less about the long-term affordability and more about the outcome of more of a certain type of housing. And I'll touch on that as we get to those actions. But this action in particular, if you were looking at supporting development of income restricted housing, so that's got that state and federal funds that guarantees, that requires that housing stay affordable, say, for 60 years. So that's pretty long-term affordable. And what happens after that 60-year point is something that the state is dealing with now, as the term used to be 30 years instead of 60. But as some of that housing, those tax credits, that kind of thing expires. So there's ways to keep that housing affordable longer than 60 years. And then if you're working with a land trust or a housing co-op, part of their job is looking at long-term affordability. Land trusts generally are looking at very long-term affordability. Housing co-ops, you'd have to understand what the co-op was proposing before deciding how to interact with it. So for this particular action, I would say you'd be looking at fairly long-term affordability.
Beth, can I jump in real quick? And just,
please.
Mayor, excellent questions. That's exactly kind of the feedback and analysis we kind of want in this. And it's also, I think, the thinking that we kind of have to bring to the table as a city who needs to get creative when it comes to these types of strategies. I mean, there are more than one way to do land bank. There's more than one way to do land banking. We've been doing it in a way. Sparrow is an example of land banking, but it doesn't have to be like that. So just want to give you a shout out.
Well, I mean, it's a question we've grappled with for, several years. Yeah. I mean, we talked about the Coho development, how do we, I still don't know. Do we have a way to monitor those 20 years, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now?
Yeah. That's a good question.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions from anybody else? No. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Certainly. I appreciate your questions. So reducing system development charges or planning fees. The city already has a policy where it evaluates, it considers whether to basically grant a system development charge waiver, which means paying for the system development charge some other way. for housing that's built that's affordable at less than 30% of median family income. So that's very low income housing. This action would consider extending that for up to 60 or 80% of median family income. So expanding that for up to 60% of median family income. Again, that's your income restricted housing. So that would be long-term affordable. You already are getting that.
So you're saying we have it now for 30%? Is that?
Yes, I believe so. Joseph?
It's been a policy consideration since I've been here.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you just said 60%, but your slide says 80%.
I was going to say, and the city might want to consider whether it wants to go up to 80% in some cases. And that is because the outcome the city is looking for might well be building that housing that really has a hard time getting financing because the state and federal funds just aren't there to support development of housing that's affordable between 60 and 80% of median family income, or 60 and 100% of median family income. There's quite a lot of need in that area. And so this might be something where if it was combined with other actions in here, the city makes a development agreement, for instance, with a market rate developer in granting certain of these incentives, if you will, where the city is paying all or part of the system development charges, plus doing other things. And what the city is getting out of it is some guarantee of affordability. And of course, part of that would be the mechanism for verifying that affordability.
So just to give you an example, the CET funding that we're putting towards Hillside, I believe actually is to pay off the SDCs for that development specifically. So we found an alternative funding source, and that's how they got extra points basically for that development. And they're at 60% AMI, is that correct?
Yeah, 16 below. So some are 30. There's actually.
So that when you ask if we've done this, that's how we've been doing it today.
And I will say that makes sense to me. That whole, SDC backfilling has always been an issue that comes up. I look at your memo that says the 50 to 80% of AMI. I mean, when you get to 80% of AMI, your housing costs can be up to $2,000, $1,940, which is well above even our new, that's above, depending on the size of the family and the size of the unit, but that is in there with where our new market rate housing is coming in. So I guess I'm a little reluctant, a little skeptical about the idea of going to 80%. We have that housing coming in already. Mm-hmm. Why do we need to incentivize it?
Mm-hmm.
I have a similar question, and my question would be is that, how many times do we see SDC, rate being a deal breaker?
Most developers know it's coming. They will complain about it the most. As far as permit fees go, that's the highest. That's the biggest.
Well, I just kind of, is this just another form of corporate welfare on the commercial side? I don't know. I'm not trying to be trivial. Yeah. I'm asking a question about, do we see it as a deal breaker?
Yeah, as for market rate, there's not much consideration for waiving any SDCs, but these are more of the nonprofits typically that are asking for consideration. Again, this is consideration. This isn't like we'd give it to anybody because we might need that money. So we don't want to just obligate it.
Well, and in the example we're talking about, I think there's a lot of confidence that this helped us secure additional units below 60%.
Yeah, I can understand it at the lower income.
The other piece to remember is that we also adopted some new types of housing in the last code package. That's another place where we've had some discussions about whether or not, so our CET funding, some of it has to go towards market rate. So my only caution is that might be a place where we want to use CET funds or these other opportunities.
Some of it has to go to market rate?
It was for workforce housing.
We call it workforce housing. I was going to say 120 AMI and below. So.
Okay.
So just keep that in mind. We're collecting some of the taxes to actually specifically apply to that portion of housing stock. Is that fair, Joseph?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's actually, I mean, I think actually Beth will probably hit on that project or those projects.
Oh, thank you. Sorry,
I
Beth.
will in a little while. And so what we might do is we might write this so that it's clear that part of the evaluation process for whether you grant this or not is a clear understanding of what outcome you're getting. In other words, not giving away money and not getting something back for it. So you don't have to go up to 80%. You could go up to 80%. It may well be that if you're looking at something like newly built mixed income housing, where, you know, part of the housing is affordable, closer to 60% of median family income, you might want some flexibility, is what I'm really saying.
Yeah,
Are there any other
60%
questions
makes a
or
lot more
comments?
sense to me. Going higher, I think it needs a much sharper look.
That's a fair point. Any other comments? Okay. I'll continue on. So a multiple unit property tax exemption. What this is it's a 10-year property tax exemption that would be granted for housing. It can be granted for housing up to 120% of median family income. Here we've said focus on up to 80% of median family income. And this is specifically for housing that is meeting certain requirements the city has. Let me put it to you this way, a different way. The city establishes where it might grant the MUPD exemption, multi-unit property tax exemption. It establishes under what conditions the city would do it. And so some cities are looking at conditions like showing a pro forma that clearly demonstrates that the housing couldn't be built at the level of affordability you're looking at without the property tax exemption. So that's something that Eugene and Bend, for instance, are requiring. And of course, they have to have people who are capable of reviewing the pro forma and seeing if there's truth to the pro forma. So that might be staff, that might be a consultant who is assisting with that. There's lots of other conditions that the city can put in for granting of MUPD. And then when a developer applies for MUPD, they specifically come to the city and will ask for it, and the city decides whether it's going to grant it. And when I say the city, I mean the city council. So it's a very discretionary property tax exemption. I think it was Anne who was mentioning that that CET includes a requirement for supporting development of workforce housing. And this is one of the types of developer incentives. There's many other types that can be used for that.
So I've never heard of this one before. I was surprised by it in the packet. I mean, I'm familiar with the vertical development housing credit or whatever. It sounds like this is similar, but it doesn't require mixed use. Is that the difference?
No, exactly. The difference is that the vertical housing tax credit results in mixed use development, which is rarely affordable at the levels that we're talking about because of the construction type it is and the construction costs. So this allows for a fully residential building. This provides more opportunity for achieving housing that's affordable in that middle income range.
And this is about private development. So this is not about the REACH and the haciendas of the world. This is about private development.
It is. In Portland, this tax exemption is called multi. It's used by lots of cities across Oregon. It's almost as common as the nonprofit tax exemption, but not quite.
And so we would have to go on a application by application basis to the other taxing districts? Or we would go to the other taxing districts as a initial setup of a program.
Exactly.
That's what you would do. In the initial setup of the program, you would negotiate with the other taxing districts. From what I understand with the property taxes foregone by the school district is school districts, that money is made up through a state fund, but it makes the school district more dependent on that state financing or that state funding rather. So school districts don't lose funding as a result of this kind of tax exemption.
I didn't realize
it just
that.
comes from a little different place.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize that. I mean, this school district has partnered with us on the exemption for Northwest Housing Alternatives. The other taxing districts have not really been asked, and I do think that's something we have to do.
So in developing an UPTE program, if the city chooses to do it, the discussions with the other taxing district would be key, in addition to setting what your criteria and where the location that you would consider granting the exemption.
Okay. I mean, we know our fire district is concerned about these kind of exemptions. But
Yeah, I mean, and unfortunately, I think these are kind of the few. It's always tax exemptions as the main lever, especially here in Oregon, as far as trying to create any kind of incentives to get what you want. Just because we don't have that many taxes to work with, whether we give people breaks or not. So it seems to always come from a similar pot, I guess is my point.
and is this, are you thinking of this as a tool for middle housing or for apartment buildings?
This is multiple unit housing. This is multifamily housing, so 5 or more units per structure.
Okay.
I don't believe this is being used for middle housing types.
Correct.
Mayor, may I ask a question? Sure. I'm wondering if we can increase affordability within mixed-use development by varying the type of housing that would be part of mixed use, looking at apartments and, smaller condominiums or things along those lines. Or if we've just established that within a mixed use commercial sort of development, the affordability, it can't be reached. Does that make sense?
Yeah, talk more about that. I'm not totally tracking, but I feel like you're onto something.
I think mixed use commercial zoning can be a great tool to be able to increase density. But if that strategy is not something that helps us reach the affordability mix within those new developments, then it's not really an anti-displacement strategy. We're increasing density, but we're not increasing the opportunities for people who live in Milwaukie to stay in Milwaukie. So I'm wondering if there's some variation within, the housing type that would allow us to focus in on rental apartments, condos, things like that, that would be mixed use. We would get the density and we get some more stock that could be affordable.
So when you're saying mixed use, you're saying like mixed housing types, more than just commercial and residential, or are you saying
both?
They're saying all of that.
So I'm thinking about when we're going back and looking at neighborhood hubs and we're looking at transit-oriented development, and if we do an overlay to increase density that would allow for commercial and residential, can we look at variations within that residential to increase affordability, within those developments? And I'm happy to send it.
I think it's an interesting question.
offline.
Yeah, and I do want to keep it on the map here. So I think, we're going to come back with an understanding of this. And if it does work, we'll at least put it in for consideration by the council.
Okay.
The second piece I just wanted to make sure everybody knows is that we have an added story of development allowed for, at least in some of our zones, if you build affordable housing or if you build green infrastructure housing. So I just want to also say we aren't trying to incentivize it by giving additional density. And we can give you an update on how successful that has been or not been.
Councilor Stephen Jordan, I like an interesting idea. I don't know. And I don't know how it fits with this one, but we'll look into it.
If there's a there, then let's keep talking. And if not, I'll just come back next week.
Well, I kind of wonder if there's some combination of some of the incentives that we're talking about here, like granting, an SDC waiver, along with some zoning change that may, I don't know.
Yeah,
I think we'll have to talk about it and think about it.
It almost sounds like Beth, it almost sounds like a vertical housing / MUPD kind of hybrid is what I just
Maybe.
throw it out there as maybe there's something there. I don't know.
Well, in talking with my colleague who does a lot of the real estate analysis on this, what she assured me is that she just hasn't seen any affordable housing coming out of the vertical housing tax credit.
Yep. True. For us too.
So we'll get her involved in that conversation.
Cool. Thanks, Beth.
All right. Any other questions or comments on this?
Not seeing any.
Okay. So the next one is about increasing densities in your high density residential zone. So you've recently made some pretty big changes to your HDR zone where you consolidated some zones and increased your densities, I think to a minimum of 25, and if I'm remembering correctly, a maximum of 32. And looking at some additional opportunities for increasing your densities in your high density. So evaluate single allowed density in your HDR. Maybe you don't need a maximum density at all. Maybe you regulate the building more based on the height limitations for the building and what do you call it? Your lot coverage ratio and that kind of thing, your setbacks. And so you don't worry as much about number of dwelling units that may allow the market to do more density. Look for opportunities to rezone or add more land to the HDR zone. Sometimes that's really difficult to do. Evaluate opportunities to support redevelopment of underutilized parcels in your HDR. So if you have parking lots, for instance, that are underutilized, that's the obvious example, or old obsolete buildings. Also consider setting some sort of FAR standard, floor area ratio standard, so that you're making sure that you're not just getting small studios and 1-bedroom apartments, but you're also getting family size apartments that are 3- and 4-bedroom apartments, so that you're not just getting a monolithic small unit type in your HDR. So a number of different things to consider in changing your HDR. In this project, just as a reminder, we might list the kind of things that you might do in that, and then sometime during the 6-year period, staff would be taking this up with the Planning Commission and then with the City Council on deciding the actual changes to make to your code.
So my initial thing when I read this was, we just upgraded most of it by 250% more density. So, why not let that play out? The thing you said, though, that does appeal to me is, two things you said kind of run counter to each other. One is the, whatever the box is, whatever the Jell-O mold, as one of our former consultants called it, is, with the setbacks and the height and everything. I'm not interested in revisiting that. But the question of how many units are within that, I don't really care. I don't really care about regulating. That said, that does run a little bit counter to the idea of promoting the larger units, because that is going to promote probably more smaller units.
So you could have both, and make sure that you get some percent of the larger units as well as the smaller units. I mean, both are certainly needed. You just wouldn't necessarily want a monoculture.
And I will say, I mean, I do think the neighborhood, this is where the neighborhood, there's a dovetailing with the neighborhood hubs. We may be indeed looking, a year or two from now at adding to the HDR zone for a couple of neighborhood hubs. Yeah.
And so this might be an action that gets set out for evaluation closer to year 5 than year 1, to see what plays out a little bit, because of course your staff isn't going to be able to do all of the things in the HPS in year 1. So maybe this gets out a little bit later.
Other comments, other questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any.
All right. So then evaluating incentives for affordable housing development, such as density bonuses. So this goes along with the last one. It's a little different way of looking at it, and it's not a zone by zone thing as much as the HDR piece. But consider permitting a larger number of units in a building or development site, permit smaller minimum lot sizes in some cases, provide a bonus height allowance or exemption for height restrictions, reducing the amount of open space required, looking at different setbacks. All of these things might be things that you want to do, but specifically to affordable housing. So here we've said up to 80% of MFI, and maybe you want to consider this only for development that's up to 60% of MFI. Could go, either way on this.
Didn't we do some of that, Laura, in the middle housing code?
No, there's not any incentives for affordable housing. We talked about doing that for a while, but that got taken off the table at one point during the process.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
I thought there was at least like a bonus floor or a height and a setback.
No.
No? Okay.
No.
Yeah, we talked about it. It grew out of creating like an affordable housing incentive municipal code section, really. So it would go with any part of the zone, any zone in the city. But if someone is doing affordable housing project, they would get some incentives when it comes to some design, heights, density.
That is something that we explored a little bit internally, so we can pull it out and talk about it again if we needed to.
Or not.
Or not.
Were there any other comments or thoughts on this?
I mean, again, just subject to the whole thing about verifiability. I think it's a conversation we should have. Yeah, it's not yeah.
Yeah. Most of the folks that I've seen in other cities that when we've had a code package like this, they were all affordable housing developers that used federal funds or state funds that locked in for years and perpetuity.
And that makes it easy. I mean, if that's what we can limit it to, then.
So that's, I think that's like preface of all these, things that create units. Yeah. There has to be a mechanism, there has to be an entity outside of us that will regulate, income qualify every tenant every single year. It has to happen. So there's a lot of administration. So that's over here on the side, but just think that as we keep going through these different policies.
And so this might be one that especially we want to lower the MFI possibility on.
Yeah.
Okay.
60 is, probably more reasonable. And I hear that in my ear here from Councilor Body.
Well, yourself is making sense.
Okay, so I'm going to keep going on. So inclusionary zoning. I want to step through, I'm first going to step through what inclusionary zoning in Oregon requires. So a mandatory inclusionary zoning policy only applies to multi-family housing with 20 or more units. It cannot require more than 20% of units be affordable. And I think that affordability, if I'm remembering right, is at 80% of median family income or below. You have to allow a fee in lieu of building units. So if a developer doesn't want to build any affordable units, you have to let them pay for that. And it has to be paired with some sort of incentives, like a SDC or fee waiver reductions, a property tax and exemption, or some other financial incentives. So the key here for making sure that everybody understands this is that it only applies to multifamily housing with 20 or more units. And what we're seeing, what my economists who have looked at this in Portland in a way that I have not, because I'm not an economist, is that it has the potential to curtail development overall if the incentives aren't calibrated in such a way to offset the impacts to development feasibility. In other words, if your incentives don't make the housing still feasible for development, then you may see something like less housing development or development of a lot more buildings with 19 or fewer units. And those are exempt from inclusionary housing. Essentially the price of the low-income housing is passed on to the purchasers of the market rate housing is what we're saying here. So we've included this because our conversations at the last meeting with the city council, you were very keen to see it. And the HCTC was also very interested in this. I think if the city wants to proceed with this, our recommendation would be, before implementing such a policy, do some evaluation of what the potential real estate feasibility impact is, so that you make sure that you're calibrating your incentives correctly, so you're not shutting down development of larger multifamily housing. Because if you remember, part of what is driving increase in houselessness sort of across the nation is underproduction of housing in general. It's not the only thing implicated in increase of houselessness, but less housing and underproduction of housing is certainly part of the problem.
So are you staying abreast of what's going on in Salem these days?
Well, a lot's going on in Salem. So I like to think so, but probably not enough.
So do you think anything's going on in this arena?
I haven't heard of anything going on in this arena.
Okay.
In Salem, they're talking about housing so much, but they're talking about different parts of housing.
Yeah.
I haven't heard any discussion of consideration of changes to the state inclusionary zoning requirements.
I mean, I haven't seen anything either, but I have not been able to keep up with all the 900 housing bills or whatever it is.
I'm not saying that all my colleagues have, but some of my colleagues are very interested in inclusionary zoning. So I'm confident that I would have heard about something.
Okay, good. I do remember when Portland enacted it, and we heard there was a huge rush of applications going in the month before it went into effect. And then, like you say in the slide, that suddenly all the buildings were 19 units or fewer. I mean, I'm sure that's leveled out to some degree now, but I do remember hearing that. Yeah.
So that'd be part of the evaluation side that Beth's speaking to, is kind of really understanding what type of impact it would have here. And then the other potential action item is also pushing legislators to change this to something different. We know some, so that could just be part of it. Worth considering.
Yeah.
I mean, if the requirement was for 5 units or more, of multifamily housing, then I'd have a very different opinion about this this action.
Do you have, I mean, and again, this is going to be the area where the verifiability is going to be an issue because you're going to have a private landowner. You're not going to have those.
So this is one of them where also the action evaluation would also include finding a partner that would basically manage those units in perpetuity.
Oh.
So,
And we've talked about adding that language specifically to this item.
Yeah.
I think you were spot on though, Mayor, that this is probably more than just this item for us to be able to track the units. So how we note that in this document will be interesting, but I think it's important.
Yeah. Other questions, comments? No? Okay, keep going.
All right, we're getting there. All right, we did that one. All right, so develop options and services to address and prevent houselessness. And so what we've got here are a number of different ways that the city might partner and collaborate. So partnering and supporting Clackamas County's affordable housing development and rehabilitation projects, collaborating with community partners to provide a continuum of programs that address need of unhoused persons and their families. Seek opportunities to leverage grants to support additional resident services or supportive housing services. Look at reducing barriers to development is implicit in here. So the actions that we've just talked about in the land banking, the SDC deferrals, I can't remember what item D was. That was probably the increasing HDR densities and inclusionary zoning. Those are, well, I don't think inclusionary zoning. I think I meant the density bonus. Those are all things that go to support this kind of thing also. So this is one of the ways in which a number of these actions would interlock together. And so part of this depends on how much funding is available for this and what the city does.
But it looks like, just to confirm, Beth, that we have it as partnerships as well. So I think that this is probably ongoing work with the county.
Definitely.
So council knows, we do have the peer support position. The negotiations with that are going really well. And I am expecting that position to move forward in the next couple weeks.
Okay. So is there anything about this? I mean, it's far from clear that the governor's going to give cities, I mean, that the legislature is going to give cities directly money, but it is something that the Oregon Mayors Association is pushing for allocations directly to the cities to address housing issues. Are these some of the things, I mean, we have put in sort of a placeholder thing of what we would do with such an allocation, but are these some things we could think about using an allocation like that for?
I think so. And then if you, I'm talking over somebody, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
For it.
Okay. And if you got an allocation, say that allocation was enough to buy a site where a nonprofit developer might build permanent supportive housing. And so it's got the services that are necessary to support people in exiting from houselessness. Then, you know, that's where you take action item A, apply some of that money, do some of the things maybe in action item E around, you know, density bonuses for affordable housing, and then acting through what's in action item G for some of those partnerships. The housing comes to fruition magically, of course. But these are some of the ways that these things may interact together.
Yeah, and houselessness and supportive services are usually provided by the county, right? So this is acknowledgement that we have to support the continuum of care from the streets to permanent housing. And so we thought it was important to at least have this action item as embedded, because it's something that we've already been working towards, and I don't think we're gonna go far from it.
Well, no matter what, we have 18 years of funding coming on the opioid settlement. So that is also working towards these numbers.
Okay, I'm not seeing any questions.
Thank you. I'm just taking a bunch of notes as we're talking because there's good things being said. All right, so then looking at a revolving loan fund for homeownership assistance. So these could be things like down payment assistance, home repair, weatherization, accessibility improvements for people with disabilities to be able to continue to be in their households, that kind of thing. And so one of the important things for this is you got to have money. You must identify a funding source. So there's a new funding source through the state, through the OHA, which must be the Oregon Health Authority. It's a new program that is not functional yet, but expects to be functional as it's getting its rules written and that kind of thing, where that gives funding to cities for this kind of thing. There's federal funding through things like weatherization assistance programs that the funding may go less to cities and more to partners, but that could be something that the city is also working with. Looking at CDBG funds and accessing that through the county to support homeownership assistance. So you've got what program do you want, and then how are you going to pay for it? So sort of two pieces to this. The home repairs, if you think about home repairs and compared to down payment assistance, say, down payment assistance can sometimes be some pretty big numbers. Like, you know, are you looking at down payment assistance of $25,000 or $100,000 per household? Home repairs can be things like $10,000, sometimes upwards of $50,000 per household. Accessibility improvements might be smaller in the $7,000 to $10,000. So there's, you know, some question about equity. How many people are you able to help, and who are you able to help? But I think the intention of all of these is helping your moderate and lower income households achieve or maintain their home ownership.
And are there partners? I mean, if
Yes.
if money suddenly was identified, are there partners doing these programs? I mean, we wouldn't have to start programs for this.
No,
There are.
No, a lot of the
there are partners.
time you give funding to somebody else.
Yeah, there are entities doing, that's already set up. The other cities are just putting it in the pot. So it just goes towards their city and their jurisdiction. So it would be more of adding to that pot and making sure it goes to Milwaukie.
And a couple of things to keep in mind, the federal dollars are out there right now for the energy component of
Yes.
this. So there may be a way to secure those funds and then manage it elsewhere. The second piece is, this is also, and this is contradictory, but this is also a county service. So we are dipping our feet into something that the county is currently doing. They do home repairs and weatherization programs. So it's just something to keep in mind as we're talking about whether or not we need to do this piece. But I do think there are funding sources today, whether you did it through federal grants or you did it through levying a climate fee.
There's a loan option through CDBG that is at very low, if not maybe 0% interest, that's available for local jurisdictions. It's not, I mean, it's not a ton, but that might be an area where we could partner with the county and ask them to apply for that loan, you know, in conjunction with our efforts. So I don't know, that might be an option.
Cool. That's great.
It's usually a percentage of the total CDBG for the jurisdiction.
Yeah, and to be frank, we haven't done a great job of tapping in that resource, and we could do better.
Well, I was going to ask about that because I saw the reference to CDBG in the CDBG Community Development Block Grants for anybody who's watching in the report. And actually, you know, 15 years ago, the city was, I mean, that's how the city built most of its sidewalk projects before SAFE, was the ones on Home and 40th were a CDBG project. The Locust Road sidewalks around Llewellyn Elementary were a CDBG project. I don't know what other, those were the most visible ones that I was aware of. I don't know how else the city might have used them in that period, but I sort of thought maybe we priced ourselves out of CDBG eligibility, but it sounds like you're saying no, we are.
For eligibility, we still are eligible, but the grant amounts are low. And so what we've looked at are things like ADA ramps often is the connection, but I think it's a great opportunity here because we haven't been going after those. Those are managed by Clackamas County for us.
So I want to be sensitive to time. Shall we move on?
Yes, please.
All right. People might want to get to sleep one day tonight. So you've already got urban renewal established, and you're already accumulating money in your urban renewal fund. And so one thing that the city can do is use funds as they build up or as they're available to support housing development, be it development of income restricted housing, be it funding things like parcel assembly, that kind of thing, building infrastructure that's necessary to support new housing development. So urban renewal ends up being an important source of funding. And we're not proposing anything new here, just that the city do what it says it's going to do, which is use urban renewal in part, not in whole, to support housing development and affordable housing development specifically.
And we included those funds in this latest budget.
I was going to say, we just did a 5-year urban renewal spending plan. Yeah.
And this is in there.
Yeah.
And so this is just a reminder on this next slide of where your urban renewal district boundary is. And the last action is about using your construction excise tax that you already have. So here we're showing what your current fund balance is, and then showing how you're expected to spend that fund balance. 1.7 million on the Hillside Phase 1, which includes 275 units of housing that's affordable at 30 and 60% of AMI, and $300,000 for middle housing courtyard at Short Stack Housing in partnership with Proud Ground. Basically actions, this action and the previous action are tied into paying for some of the things that we talked about in other actions. And then as a reminder, this is how CET for residential has to be used. So 50% used for developer incentives for multifamily market rate or affordable housing, 35% used specifically for affordable housing programs as defined by the city, and then 15% goes to Oregon Housing and Community Services for homeownership programs that provide down payment assistance that theoretically comes back to the city, to people who are living in the city.
So have we already been giving that? Do we routinely give that 15%? It goes automatically.
How it comes back, I'm not sure.
Okay. But they're supposed to be using it in Milwaukie, but they don't do any accounting to us of that?
That I'm aware of, no. But, yeah.
You should maybe ask them.
Yes.
But so 85, I mean, the first, the 50%, we have flexibility, but really 85% of that residential CET could go to affordable housing.
Yep.
And some of it has to go for development, developer incentives that we talked about before. So of your workforce housing, essentially. And then beyond the actions, we've got some recommendations. These are things that we don't want to have fall off the list. So if you have funding available for it in the future, consider more rental assistance programs, which would be do what you've already done before. Pursuing more CDBG funds from Clackamas County. Looking at pre-approved plan sets for accessory dwelling units or middle housing topologies those might well be something that the state is looking at developing, and Milwaukie might evaluate whether those pre-approved plan sets would be ones that Milwaukie would want to use. And the purpose of the plan sets is that if developers use them and the city had adopted them, essentially said that they were good for use in the city, then that lowers the development costs for that, because they don't have to get approval for their plans. Allowing tiny homes is one that we've had a lot of discussion about, because tiny homes can be both housing for households with, moderate and higher incomes, because of course you can get really nice tiny homes. You can also get tiny homes that are essentially transitional housing for people experiencing houselessness. So the very small units that are meant to be temporary housing. So there's still a fair bit of discussion about allowing tiny homes. One of the reasons that it hasn't made it into a strategy specifically is there's only so much staff capacity for doing all of this. And we're trying to set up an HPS that the city has a reasonable chance of completing the actions in 6 years. That said, if having tiny homes as an action is something that you really want to see, we should know about that. Supporting preservation of manufactured home parks. The reason that that's a recommendation is that something that, generally speaking, the city has much more of a partnering role in and less of a leadership role in. So the city could zone manufactured home parks only for use of as manufactured home parks, making it harder to redevelop them. But beyond that, the major action is if a manufactured home park owner is looking at selling their manufactured home park, that takes a certain amount of time based on state requirements and rules. Then, is the city able to help support the owners of the manufactured home park connect, say, with a nonprofit who may help them buy the manufactured home park? That's something that I know that 30 or more manufactured home parks have gone through in Oregon over the last few years. And there's a few nonprofits that have been working with them on that.
Did you say 30?
30.
30 new manufactured home parks have gone in?
30 existing manufactured home parks have become owned by the people who live in them.
Okay. Thank you.
Certainly. And then relocation assistance requirements. And honestly, off the top of my head, I don't remember a lot about that one, Joseph, or Laura, if you remember more about that one.
Yeah, that came up in conversation about what Portland's doing with their relocation requirements for when someone is evicted from their house, that the landlord has to pay a certain relocation assistance fee. So that was, I believe, part of that discussion. Maybe I'm totally
I thought
off
we
that.
had done that. For like no cause evictions and stuff.
I thought had, honestly, but
Yeah.
it's been a couple of years and I don't remember if we revoked it.
We had that emergency housing
Yeah.
code, and then at some point we made it no longer emergency.
So this
And
is,
it's
I'm sorry, go ahead.
3 months notice.
Yep. We reverted back to the state.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the part I can't answer right now, is if when we reverted, it actually took that piece out. We'll have to look at it.
Yeah, I think you're correct. Yeah.
So does this relocation assistance for the tenant or the landlord?
Because it's from the landlord to the tenant. Yeah.
Sorry?
It's by the landlord pays it to the tenant.
So it's to the landlord.
Yeah, this would be,
Cost.
yes. Yes, cost.
No, it would be
No,
The cost would be to the landlord.
For the benefit.
The landlord would pay the cost
Yeah.
to the tenant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think our question here is, for any of these, are you particularly interested in seeing them rise up to the level of an action that would be included in the HPS at this point?
well, it sounded like there might be some opportunities on the CDBG.
There are. The issues on the CDBG, just to keep it in mind, is that we don't control those funds. So yes, we can pursue it. And I think as long as the language stays pursue, we're fine. At least historically, when I used to help manage these funds, smaller cities would only get a grant maybe one every 3 years. So just know that there's a lot of competition, and we pool those funds very specifically so you get enough to do a project, but it means you don't get a project every year.
And so that might be a reason to argue to keep it as a recommendation. So the city can still do it, but it's not necessarily an action that the city's, doing on an ongoing basis.
Well, yeah, given what your memo said about how, if we create it as an action and we don't do it, we have to, report on that, or we want to change it, we have to ask for permission. Yeah, I could see some, let's not create too many things as actions.
Yeah, part of the
that's why there's some caution.
yeah, part of this is the art and science in this is that if it feels like too much, then kudos to us because we tried to really reduce it down to feel reasonable. If it feels like too little, then that's probably what we want because we don't want to set ourselves up for failure with the state. I mean, and also it doesn't mean these are the only things that we'll be doing, but it's the things that we have to report back to the state. And that's what we want to be successful at. Doesn't mean we won't try or think about or be creative in other ways. So just want to make that clear. This is all about what we're going to report back.
Questions, comments?
So I'll circle back to the questions. We've been discussing these questions. Do we have about the right actions? Should any be added? Should any of the things that we talked about be left out?
I guess I'd like to know more about that whole MOPTI or whatever you called it. That's the one that was new to me, and I'm not sure I still quite see how it will work. So I'd like to, anyway. But I'm not saying it shouldn't be there. I just would like to understand more about what it'll do and how it would work in reality.
I also heard an application of partnership tracking language on several of these that we probably need to come back to and revisit. So if we're going to leave them in there, we just need to make sure that there's language in there that allows for that tracking piece to be done by someone else.
Absolutely.
And as a reminder to the council, that means that these programs may have to actually generate some money for the management of the program. So when the developer is developing these units, we would need them to also generate some revenue to pay for the ongoing 30-year management.
Yes.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
All right. And this is our next steps. We're, refining the list based on your input, based on what we heard from the HCTC. We've got some upcoming and ongoing public engagement that we'll be doing. We expect to have a draft HPS in April and talking to you again probably in May.
And so that's for adoption? Or will adoption come later?
The adoption will come later. Yeah, we're going to get through it. Yeah, and we'll bring it back.
Okay.
Beth, that was the 5th time I've seen that. That was the best.
I'm getting better. I like it. I made myself good notes before doing this one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And if I could, Mayor, I want to give a shout out to Laura and her planning team because they've picked up so much of the weight in community development, and as a project manager and just the amount of things that you have continued to do, just thanks and heck of a job.
Thanks for being
I couldn't do this without you, so just want to give Laura some credit in front of council.
Great.
100%.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, and we do have a public comment. Oh, someone who wants to give. Okay.
I just want to, before you go and we end this segment, we had the last council meeting, we had a pretty deflating visual, right, of where we're standing. And there was some concern about exactly how much could we do as a city, right, in terms of affordability. I mean, this is what we're talking about. And this is what I was kind of talking about is look how many of these we take the lead on. And right, we do have to have partnerships, but that's with anything that we've done. This was a very encouraging thing for me to see personally, because I'm looking at this like, look, you show some of these steps to the public and to the people we're trying to help, they're probably gonna be on board with that too and say, hell yeah, that's what we're talking about as well. So I just want to say, like, this is really what, it's hard work. This isn't easy, because I've sat through a few of these meetings. They're long, and I've seen this about 4 or 5 times as well. But this is what we're talking about. This is what we're talking about when we're really doing public work and public benefit stuff. So I just want to say kudos to the presentation, and I'm so encouraged by this that I think we can make some things happen. So thank you.
Appreciate that, Counselor.
Thank you guys, all of you, really.
Okay, well, our public commenter is about this item, so we're not moving on from this item. I don't want Laura and Joseph to leave in case there's something, but we will let Camden, and we generally limit people to 3 minutes.
I'll be brief.
Okay.
All right. So you all know me, but my name is Camden McCone, and I live in the Llewellyn neighborhood here in Milwaukee. And I'm here to advocate for the actions D and E, increase allowable residential densities and provide density bonuses to developers for income-restricted housing. It's not really a comment on the other options. These are just the ones that I'm excited about. And yes, I did just admit to being excited about land use and zoning. It's on TV and everything, yeah, so no turning back. As noted in the housing capacity analysis report, our HDR zone maximum density is not particularly high, and in fact, the current maximum density of 32 units per acre is roughly the same as building a quadplex on 1/8 of an acre in the medium density zone we have. And I think it makes a lot of sense to have our high density zone be the higher density zone rather than RMD. And additionally, almost all of our higher density zones are right along transit routes. And facilitating higher density there is important for providing more transit-oriented development, which is crucial to achieving the city's climate goals. And it's also good for the city's finances, as less vehicle miles traveled is means less road maintenance. So with these benefits in mind, I would also suggest that the HDR and mixed-use zones be extended along all the transit routes in town in that vein. Not losing track of the fact that the goal here is affordability. Action E is also great because adding more Ross Play is great for the long-term effects of slowing down the cost of living, increasing. It doesn't really help people who are already cost burdened right now. As we know, it's no secret that new developments tend to like the market rate units because they bring in more profit. That's not going to change the fact that developers want to make the most money out of it. Providing the bonuses kind of takes away this either or fight between affordable units or market rate, when it's kind of just additive. Really, they can have both then. So not only will this increase of affordable units be of direct benefit to low-income households from obviously the rent being cheaper, but the fact that these zoned areas are along transit routes would also make it easier to go car-free if they so choose, or at least drive less, and again, saving them even more money. I believe that these actions fall in line with city goals and are key to fighting our housing crisis in a sustainable and equitable way. So I would ask that you include them in the housing production strategy and get started on them soon. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. I guess that closes out that item. And we're going to take a break till 5 minutes till 9. Forgot to stop for Chuck. Okay, welcome back, everyone. So on my script, this didn't read exactly like I had read it on the agenda, but we have 3 things to discuss: the communications agreement, the committee assignments, and the legislative and regional issues. Why don't we do them in that order? I'm going to take them out of the order here. So communication agreement, Scott handed it out. You guys all got it at the retreat and probably before that. Did anyone have any things they wanted to change in the communications agreement? Or do you feel like you haven't had enough time to look at it and you want to take more time? That's also an option. It does not have to be
I'm good
done
with it.
tonight.
I'm good.
Yeah.
Everybody's good. All right. So,
We'll bring it back to the next consent agenda and it'll be just as presented and
okay, and then we'll all sign it then. Okay, great. Well, that was easy. Okay. So committee assignments. I started to bring this up earlier. So we have 2 that to me are the biggest lifts in terms of number of meetings. One is C4 and one is Parks, because both of those are essentially 2 meetings a month. Parks, it's the DAC and the Parks Board, and C4, it's C4 and C4 Metro. So let's talk about those 2 first, and then we can go through the whole list. Adam and Rachel, also known as Rebecca.
Rachel.
So are we
Get mad at
confirming,
Kelly. Blame her.
we're confirming everything that says Rachel because there are several. That means Rebecca, right?
It's Kelly Brooks.
Some places it does say Rebecca, but in a couple places it says Rachel. Adam and Rebecca had expressed interest before. Are you both interested? One being the appointee and one being an alternate? Have you
Yeah, I
guys?
can be the alternate. You've already had the leg up on a couple meetings, right?
I went to one meeting and then the mayor called in for the second one. Because I think, can't remember. Oh, we were both sick.
Yeah. You had
think
just fallen down some stairs, yeah.
Apparently it affected my memory too.
So,
I don't mind being the alternate since she's already kind of been, unless you don't want to do it.
I'm open to doing it. I mean, I just wanted to be clear that I only attended one meeting and it doesn't mean that I'm staking claim on it.
anyone else want to throw their hat in the ring on that one? No? Okay.
Nobody else? Everyone's avoiding eye contact?
Okay, I
right,
think
okay.
that is a
Do it.
Rachel. And then they'll be like, who the heck is this Rachel?
Is that for the,
I mean, they have been copying Rebecca already.
right off the,
Emails
but
on
also
that?
the Metro Subcommittee?
Yes. So both the C4 committees. And then on Parks, the council president said he needed out of that, I
Yeah.
think.
EAC.
I'm willing to do them.
Are you? Oh, okay. Okay.
If someone will coach me for tomorrow night.
Well, I was gonna say I'm willing to do it. Yeah.
Just have to exercise patience. And it can be a meeting that,
He says patiently.
it can be a meeting that you end up walking out of there and you're just like, I think we're all just a little bit dumber for having, I mean, there are times where it just goes around and around and around and people come away with feeling that nothing has been resolved or even, yes.
Yeah.
So do you want to do it? I mean, I said I'm willing to do it, but I mean, if you got,
Well, I guess to some degree it plays into the conversations we're gonna have the next couple of meetings about our relationship with them long-term. I did kind of feel like maybe having the mayor going would, I don't know that it's gonna send any message, but.
it's yours. You
but,
can have it.
I guess I would like to go at least for the next couple months until we've sort of, yeah. Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you. All right, so let's go back down. Let's just go through the chart now. Audit Committee, Robert Massey? Yep. Okay. Boards, and the rest of this first page is pretty much settled. There's nothing, we don't have any choices. We're all on the Budget Committee. We're, yeah, okay. So the second page, C4 we've dealt with. The Fire Board, Councilor Khosrowbadi and the Council President. They're on for that, okay. And the Council President also doing the Clackamas County Child Care for All Task Force. Okay, the mayor, specific meetings I have to do. Community Action Board. Again, Rachel came out of nowhere. And so Councilor Stavengard and this is the one we talked about a little bit where we don't actually have to have a counselor. We have traditionally not had a counselor, but you sounded, or maybe both of you sounded like you were interested in engaging on that one. So,
Well, I mean, I think there are a lot of opportunities to engage with the county. I don't have to do that in an official liaison role. I have their emails.
I mean, I think it might make sense for us to appoint one of you now, but preserve the ability to solicit another community member to go if you decide that it, you know, that you feel like, because I did look at their minutes of their meetings and there weren't other council members. I think there's maybe one other, well, Commissioner Sonia Fisher was going, but I don't think there were other city council members. So you want to go and you'll scope it out and report back? Okay. Okay.
The intel.
So it'll be Councilor Khosrowbadi.
Pardon?
Alternate is Councilor Khosrowbadi.
The appointee is Councilor Khosrowbadi.
Well, technically, I think.
Oh,
actually
it's supposed to be
you are-
me? It's
Yeah,
supposed to be the
so
mayor?
you're making the appointment.
Oh,
I
okay.
believe that what you just did.
I'm
is- yeah,
appointing
Exactly.
Councilor Khosrowbadi.
Listed this way, but
Okay,
Councilor knows that he's going.
okay. Homeless Solutions of Clackamas County, Councilor Stavengard.
Sure. Sounds good.
Okay. So based on what Ann emailed to us today about the staffing, I guess this one is not really needed. It might be at some future point in time when there's fundraising to do or something, but
Yeah, it's not a committee right now. So I think for now, I would strip it off.
Are we talking about Kellogg for Coho?
Correct. Yeah. In the future, I think there will be discussions about council's role.
yeah.
So we're removing it.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if it doesn't come back.
Yeah, though right now, it looks like the body is actually pretty high level ODOT staff is kind of the body making those decisions because they're the next funders. But if something comes up where it looks like an appointment is possible, we'll let you know.
League of Oregon Cities, that's really for next year. The Contract Review Board, we're all on it. The Mayor's Consortium, I'm on it. Wilda Parks is our appointee to the Clackamas, or to the Milwaukie Center Board. We're all on the Redevelopment Commission. The MRC Advisory Committee. So yeah, both Councilor Stavengard and I expressed interest in this. And frankly, I mean, I guess there's nothing that keeps us from having two people on it.
No, but the way that it's currently set up, we'd have to actually go in and change the bylaws of the organization if we had more than one of you, because this is a specific seat that is carved out in the ordinance.
Okay.
And I believe technically right now, this is the chair position. So this also is, it's only a voting member when there's a tie.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to, I mean, I will probably go to the meetings anyway, but I'm happy to let you be the designee if you want to do that.
Okay.
Okay.
Sure,
I mean, I
that sounds
did
good.
feel like your name was, I mean, well, we can circle back to that one too if you decide. If you decide you've got too many, but I guess for now, put Counselor Jordan. But I would like to be notified of those meetings too. And so here, the PARB, I guess, is coming to me as well? Or did
No,
you
I'll
want to
stay
stay
on.
on?
I'll stay
Oh,
on.
you'll stay on the PARB, okay.
And before we pass it by, I just wanted to call out, Scott, would you make sure there's a note that I would actually notify the entire council of all the MRC commission meetings and just ask that we don't have a majority going. But there's no reason that everybody shouldn't have those notifications, and you all can work out who's going if there's an extra person. Thanks.
Okay, so Council President Nicodemus is going to stay on the PARB. Is public policy, the Chamber of Commerce, Councilor Koster-Body? Yep, okay. The DAC, that's me, for now, anyway. North Clackamas Social Needs Roundtable, you're still up for that, Council President? Okay. North Clackamas Watershed Council, you're still up for that, Councilor Massey?
Yeah, you're gonna let me do it?
I'm gonna let you do it.
Okay, I'll make sure
I'm gonna let you do it. It was a labor of love for me, but 8 years is enough.
Okay.
It's time for them to have some new blood. So, yeah.
Show up to the meeting, I'm gonna escort.
Neither one of us wrote, neither one of us wrote, oh, don't show up to the meeting. Wow, yeah. They are public meetings.
Oh. Yeah, all right, I got it.
We're gonna need another pseudonym. Here. Leslie starts showing up to all the meetings.
Bears, that's me. West Advisory Committee, Councilor Koster-Body, you've been doing that. You're going to stay on that? Okay. Regional Water Providers Consortium, nobody wanted to step up for that. That's one I'm not willing to continue on. I've been doing that one for 8 years as well. It is a lighter lift as committees go because it
I'll do
meets
it.
3 times a year.
I'll do it.
Okay. Thank you. And I will send you, anyway, I'll take care of letting them know that. TSP Advisory Committee, we made that official earlier tonight, so that's a done deal. Housing Capacity Technical, the housing stuff we've just been doing. Councilor Koster-Body's been doing that, so that's all okay. Woohoo!
So that one
I
will
feel
also,
better.
we'll also do a quick resolution and bring that on consent on the 21st as well.
Okay. Great. Great. All right, legislative.
I have a quick PowerPoint.
Oh, okay.
Hope it's quick. Just piggybacking on what Kelly used to do. Here we are, here are the key dates in the session. And we are past the dates in January and it's early February, so we're still charging towards that February 21st measure introduction deadline. So I've been monitoring a number of channels and I think I've caught the ones that I've seen actual bill numbers for. And these are their scheduled or not scheduled as of this morning. So we can go through them individually if that's what council wants to do, or you can just mention them to me. But so the watch list I've seen from council is 2195 prohibits cities from applying parts of the REACH code. It's assigned to Climate, Energy, and Environmental Committee, and nothing was scheduled as of this morning. Anybody have anything to add to that one?
Oh, yeah. So should we talk about this process-wise or
Sure, that might be a better
individual
place to start
bill-wise
first, yeah.
or?
I know in the past, the folks who've tried to navigate this for council, it's become a beast.
It becomes more and more of a beast as we get, further along in the session.
And just to have a starting place, I was monitoring things and these are the ones that popped out to me. There's another slide with other things on it too.
Okay.
So is this helpful for folks or what do we want? Yeah.
So I'm going to make a recommendation just because this is going to quickly become overwhelming. So what I'm going to say is we should put this into a tracking Excel sheet. We don't talk about it up here unless you all want to discuss about a specific, but it'll show whether or not it's scheduled and whether or not we're at the point that a letter would be useful if this is a priority for you. But otherwise, we don't go into a lot of detail on these. If you want to add things to the list, great. We're going to put down who is the nominator to the list, just so that we know who we should be talking to directly. And then we'll have a discussion about any concerns on the list. So you can take off the full council support if you actually disagree with another council member about a topic. We tonight can go through just the line items. So just this is what we've heard. So i.e. REACH continues to be a priority. That's a climate bill. Marijuana tax, this would go from 3% to 10%. So allowing the cities to actually get the increased rate.
Did you say 10%?
Yeah.
Wow.
So I did ask the LOC lobbyist on this today, but I was just looking and she hasn't responded to me. There was a hearing yesterday, or last week, I guess. And I asked her if there was, what her read, she had testified there, and I'd asked her what her read was, and was there something, some other way we could testify in support, and I'll let everybody know, I'll let Scott know when I hear anything back from her. Yeah.
There was a second marijuana tax that would actually impact school districts, so we didn't recommend that we get in a fight with them. It's just not a substantial impact to us. So that one we didn't put on here. Standardized building permit process, affordable housing loan program for cities and counties, early childhood infrastructure fund, extends enterprise zone sunset date. We've had some back and forths about using enterprise zones here, but it is a tool for economic development. So having that as an ongoing tool is beneficial to this in the staff's mind. And then there's would prohibit cities from banning gas use infrastructure. There's also going to be an opposite bill we're expecting that actually requires, stops cities from banning it. So both of those things will be tracked.
That is the one that stops cities from banning it. And there's Mark Gamba's bill that will, be the opposite of that. Yeah, so they could probably be pulled together on any spreadsheet.
Any comments or concerns about this list?
Did you say there's more on there?
The next one.
Okay.
We can go to the next page, but any concerns with this list? Okay.
Now, these ones, I didn't catch bill numbers exactly, but these are topic areas that I saw come across. So maybe, per what Ann just suggested, going forward, I'll add these bills that come up with these topics, I'll add them to the spreadsheet, and then we can track them that way.
So, I do think the LOC is tracking that there were changes to executive session, adding new things that could be an executive session largely around security and cybersecurity, and also adding those kind of topics to exemptions from the public records disclosure requirement. I feel like you and Justin probably care about those more than we do. So to whatever extent you think we need to know about them, track them, but I'm not necessarily asking you to track those for me, I guess is what I would say. The gun control, I don't know that anything's going on. That's all in court. As far as I know, I don't think there's anything you need to follow there. And the broadband, I think we kind of settled it with our study last year. That's why I sent that around to everybody. But if people feel differently, or if they see, there's still a question in my mind, but just because there's federal money, but I do sense that it's really focused on
most of the
rural areas.
Most of the hearings for broadband are scheduled for the 16th, so we might know more at that point.
Yeah.
So that leaves us with the immigration policy discussion?
Yeah, that one's not legislative. I sent around a report that had been put out, and there was a policy roundtable that's really just informing recommendations for policymakers, but that's not legislative in nature.
Are there policy areas that you want us to try and capture for sort of looking for bills or what we've done in the past is we've passed resolutions with sort of broad scope. So we did it around affordable housing or we did it around climate where we just said generally, we support legislation that moves our, these 3 goals forward, and then the staff would look for those goals, or we could use that then to write a letter back to the committees. So are there policy areas that you want us also watching?
When we went to Salem, Representative Gamba was talking about an actual rent control bill. Is that, can we add that to that? Because they were talking about dropping the cap to reducing the rent increase cap and changing those.
Yeah.
That's the one you sent the letter on, yeah?
No, I sent the letter on Senate Bill 799. That's eviction reform and reduction.
Oh, okay.
So to answer your question, and I think it might be helpful to have an overarching area around affordability and housing or housing stability. There are a lot of bills that fall under that. So, and a lot of them we may want to individually review. So I don't want to assume that council would unanimously send letters of support for all of these. But there are some of them. The reasonable rent bill is Senate Bill 611 and House Bill 2733. And the rental market data bill is in legislative committee. So it's LC 3477 and 1062. So when we wrote our letter about Senate Bill 799, Stable Homes for Oregon Families wrote in response and asked the city of Milwaukie to sign on to a homeless prevention package, which includes eviction reform, reasonable rent, rental market data, and rent assistance. What I'd like to do is send their letter and the website for their coalition around to everyone and give you an opportunity to read into that. And then perhaps in our next legislative conversation, we can talk about if that's an overarching area, if we want to be part of this coalition or not. Does that sound okay? All right.
The other thing to consider is that as it becomes more clear to you all where you have alignment and agreement, you may just want to do a resolution without numbers, without bill numbers, so that one of you can call and say, hey, I just saw that this bill is moving. Can we add a letter just specifically to these 3 topic areas? So it's not saying we support or we don't support legislation. It's us saying we as a city support looking for opportunities to reduce costs on families, blah, 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 whatever that thing is. So it's just something to keep in mind.
Because as it gets closer to, as it gets to May, April and May, they will start shifting things, gutting and stuffing as they call it, or they pull something out of one bill and stuff it all in another bill and stuff. And so it is, yeah. I mean, we might want to have resolutions on a couple of key topics like that, on affordability, on the REACH code, on, certain things. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a bill that you support now might quickly become a bill that you don't support halfway through the session.
Exactly.
That happens quite frequently.
Exactly.
And that is the benefit of not naming the bill number. Honestly, it's just saying we support these actions.
Yeah, agreed.
And it helps.
I have one more bill for you, Scott, for your list. And this again goes back to the public records, is HB 3111. And what I heard, this is from the LOC call last Friday, which it's still available online. I listened to it after the fact. According to them, everything outside, I guess this was going, everything outside a personnel record is releasable. Yeah, that's what they were talking about. The guy, I'm not going to remember. I think it's Scott Winkles at LOC. But anyway, that's just one to add to your list and take a look at.
Get those housing bills.
Oh,
I'll forward the email.
I wrote
to
down
everyone.
numbers.
Okay, thank you.
I got a couple.
Yep.
They're
Thank you.
education related. SB 283. And it's about the educator workforce. SB 275. It's about alignment of like Department of Ed, TSPC, all of them finding some alignment. And then the Oregon Advocacy Commission, they're severely understaffed. They need about 29 people, and right now they have 4. So, and I'll send information out to everybody about all those.
Great, thank you. There's one other that has hearing tomorrow morning. I'm not really suggesting we send anything, but it's one I do know is near and dear to some of our restaurant owners' hearts, which is a bill that would limit the fees that DoorDash and those services can impose on restaurants. We heard about that a few years back, and it's still kicking around. So.
You know the number on that one?
It's HB 2536.
2536.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think the last piece I just wanted to say out loud for our new council members is that when resolutions or letters are drafted during the legislative session, those are drafted by council. So we can help get it on letterhead. We can try and make it fit for what you're trying to do, but just so you're prepared.
The body of the letter.
The body of the letter.
We need to be writing, yeah.
And we totally appreciate that the legislature moves very slowly until it moves super fast. It's not best to walk on a resolution. If you can have the text to us, ideally by the Friday before, that's ideal. But even the day of or day before is better than walking it on when possible. If you do bring something and it's something hot happens Tuesday afternoon before Tuesday meeting, you can walk it on. We just have to have it read in full as a best practice into the record. Resolutions are a documentation of council's opinion, so they don't carry as much weight, obviously, as an ordinance does, but still best practice to get it in a packet. And then I was just going to mention some of the stuff we have in the past. Staff belong to professional organizations, and myself included, and I actually sit on the state's Public Records Advisory Council, and there are a couple of bills coming in the records world that I'm watching, including HB 2112 that the Secretary of State Archives Department has proposed updating terminology to public records law. 2136 is one I'm watching. I'm a little skeptical. I think it eliminates fees for electronic records. I don't think it's going to go very far. And then most specifically, the council that I sit on referred SB 4417, which provides some more definitions to public records, the public records law, including definition of news media and things like that. It's a little controversial. The LOC, I think, is coming out against it, as well as some other local government groups, but it did get a wide array of different government levels supporting it. So anyway, and then 510 in a similar vein to what Council President Nicodemus was talking about for the Advocacy Commission, the Public Records Advocate's Office is also pretty underfunded for what it's been charged with doing, and it's trying to make itself a little more independent. So anyway, these are just bills that I'm watching, and sometimes staff will bring other bills.
I have another staff level watch. So it's not a bill number at this time. It is an appropriation request. So there has been a significant request for funding DPST for the training of police officers. That backup is actually causing the city to lose about $288,000 over the course of this biennium. It's a substantial hit to us. So we will be sending an email to, unless you all have concerns, to Representative Gamba, just outlining what the costs are, how those are affected, and what options he has. There's been some discussion about whether or not it needs to be operational money or if it needs to be a new physical structure. There's actually a physical structure in Portland that would allow for a significant increase in the amount of training, but it would require a partnership. So we're sending this with some explanation just to help the representative understand what some solutions are that would help Milwaukie get our officers through the system faster. Any concerns? Okay. Thank you.
I think that's it. At one point, I thought we'd review what you guys have talked about recently, but maybe that's already been touched upon.
Well, I'm gonna ask the people to report on Merkley's town hall and the C4 meeting. But before we get to that, we have the all-important question of what color we're wearing for our picture.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Thank you. February 21st, the group shot and city manager's headshot. Yeah, what color?
I mean, I had, blue is okay. I mean, in your email about that, you had said any color but blue. I didn't want to do blue this last round of colors because all my blue I've worn before. But if I need to buy a new blue jacket, it's an excuse to go shopping.
We've done blue as a background color because it matches our brand pretty well, but that's not a hard and fast rule. I mean, there's gray.
Anybody have a color scheme they want to?
Why do we all have to dress alike?
Well, I mean, it's not alike, but it's in the same tone.
In the past, there's been a discussion about coordination.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to continue to wear the same shirt I wore the first time.
Okay.
I just really would like to know if we're wearing bow ties.
Yes.
Good look.
Yeah. I mean, if we're going to coordinate, we might as well look dapper.
Okay. So I guess we're not going to coordinate. And so those of you who went to Merkley's Town Hall last Friday, can you tell us about it?
Yeah.
Do you want to start?
I mean, I only wrote down a few things that I thought were, this was in that local leaders.
The pre-meeting.
Yeah. Just the CHIP Act that he discussed, and I brought this up with Ann earlier, the microchip manufacturing to Oregon. They were talking about potentially like smaller, because they're looking for like 80 acres in Hillsborough. They're looking at potentially smaller ones to be throughout other municipalities, but we don't have any space here in Milwaukee for that, but it would have been some good jobs. The model in Wilsonville, the Wilsonville mayor spoke about their mental health housing within their community. It was a model that they first started in Wilsonville that was a breakthrough model. And she brought that up to see if we can continue that, if there's any funding for that to continue that model, to provide more mental health housing.
So it's housing that is specific to
For mental
people
health.
who are mental health
Struggling with
treatment?
mental- And they're with, it's built, it's housing, like you wouldn't be able, the thing about it is you can't tell that it's mental health housing. It just looks like regular apartment buildings and it's built within the community. So anybody within that community who needs any assistance or any help or have family members, that was.
And it's operated by the county or it's
I don't know the
operated by a
specifics.
mental?
I talked to her a little bit afterwards, but I need to get some more information on it. But I just thought it was interesting because it was something she had brought up in terms of funding and revisiting that model for other cities to follow. And then the TriMet buses, I thought was another thing that was brought up. TriMet has a charging hub being built, 200 bus charging hub to do all electric buses. And I just wrote that they're zero emission buses. I just wrote it down to see if maybe Milwaukee could participate and get some of our bus lines to be all electric.
Did they say where that hub is?
They
Is it
did.
on the whole gate?
I think they did. I just didn't write it down. And I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. But that's what I got. And then when he actually did the town hall Q&A from the public,
Right.
that's kind of what
Do you have
I wrote
anything
down.
to add, Commissioner?
There was, so the roundtable was in large part not only advocacy asks, but also thank yous. So there were a number of comments about Kellogg Dam. The addictions model out of Wilsonville, the site was a state hospital site that was then demolished and used for affordable housing or for housing in general. But there was a provision in that where a percentage of the units were then reserved for mental health. So I thought that was really innovative. A conversation around support for first-time homeowners. Let me see. Yeah, I mean, the larger Q&A question really got into some questions around his advocacy around the filibuster and inflation and, kind of mechanisms that he has available to him. So yeah, I mean, I thought it was good, and I think that's the only other thing I had here was there was a question in the larger Q&A around supports to lower the cost of living, really, or cost of repaying loans for social workers and mental health providers. And I had an opportunity to talk with the Children's Center folks afterwards, but it reminded me of our study session with the Providence Milwaukie team, where we were talking about the lack of affordability in that industry in general, and I think that we see that mirrored in social work as well, where this is proven to be such an incredibly valuable profession, and yet systemically we don't have nearly the supports that people need to maintain affordability in the communities that they're serving. And that in itself is, stressful and traumatizing, and just really appreciate everyone who goes into that field. So I had a good conversation with them afterward. Yeah, that was all that I had for that one.
And I guess from the earlier conversation about C4, nobody participated last week?
C4, or was it the water one?
Oh, both of them were last week. C4 was, I think, the second, according to my emails. I don't know if that was C4.
I didn't participate on the
Metro.
on the second.
Okay.
But I went to the January meeting, and there was some extensive conversation about the transitional housing availability, which then I think, we've all been involved in the Project Turnkey conversations with the county board. There is an update memo that went out to interested parties, and I know that the mayor shared that with council today. So I forwarded that on to Rep. Gamba and Senator Taylor's office, because they both wrote letters of support to the Clackamas County Board to consider the purchase of that property. And then I understand that some of the members of the Clackamas County Commission made visits to a neighboring county where the availability of a Project Turnkey site and transitional housing sites that are in operation were there. And so I think that's a really great opportunity for them to see from the standpoint of another provider what it looks like on the ground, how they've scaled up the model. So I really hope that that helps in the discussions that they're having. But there's a 24-page policy document that's attached to the email with their current status. And I understand that they're having some conversation about what that looks like moving forward. So fingers crossed.
Great.
Is there any indication when they're going to make a decision?
I understand that the due diligence period, I believe, ends on the 23rd or right around there. So I think that they'd have to make a decision, or at least, or some type of, they'd have to decide to extend the due diligence period. So I think they're trying to come to some consensus this month, I hope.
Okay, anything else anybody has? Okay. Well, with that, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
Been moved and seconded that we adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None heard. We're adjourned.